Hello, it's 7 o'clock. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Our top stories here this morning. Temperatures drop across England with a cold weather alert, warning of icy conditions and a risk to the vulnerable. Meanwhile, more than 240 flood warnings remain in place as communities begin the clear-up following Storm Henk. The Metropolitan Police confirms it's investigating the Post Office over potential fraud offences relating to the wrongful prosecution of hundreds of sub-postmasters. Also ahead, a boost for workers as national insurance is cut, but the Chancellor admits he doesn't yet know if taxes will drop before the next election. And the US Supreme Court will rule on whether Donald Trump can be kept off the ballots for this year's presidential election, 3 years on from the Capitol riots, as he trades blows with Joe Biden.
He's a threat to democracy. They've weaponized government. He's saying, I'm a threat to democracy.
In sports, Anthony Joshua is set to fight the former mixed martial arts star Francis Ngannou in Saudi Arabia. And Tottenham Hotspur are into the fourth round of the FA Cup as they beat Burnley thanks to a wonder goal from Pedro Porro.
Hello, very good morning. Welcome to Sky News Breakfast. After days of heavy flooding, people in England have been told to brace themselves for more bad weather as a yellow alert for cold temperatures comes into effect later on this morning. While the rain may be easing off, the warning means that there's an increased risk of ice and fog, threatening to bring a different kind of havoc to those already struggling in the aftermath of Storm Henk. Well, the alert from the UK's Health Security Agency covers the whole of England from 9 o'clock this morning, and it lasts until midday on January the 12th. Forecasters say the combination of overnight freezing temperatures and saturated ground means we're likely to see increased frost, fog and icy conditions. And the alert warns there's increased risk of death to vulnerable people, including the over 65s and those with underlying health conditions. Well, this cold weather comes as more than 1,000 homes were flooded due to the heavy rain. As of this morning, there are more than 240 flood warnings and 260 flood alerts in place across England. Well, our communities correspondent Becky Johnson has been in Nottingham to see the damage firsthand.
Across large parts of the country, riverside communities have been inundated. Weeks of heavy rain left the ground saturated and rivers full. The water had nowhere else to go. In Nottinghamshire, where a major incident was declared, nothing could stop the rising rivers.
Came to the main house overnight, basically.
Erica showed us inside her home, one of several that are flooded in the village of Collingham.
Gosh, it's almost over our wellies, isn't it? Yeah.
She didn't have chance to save very much. The entire downstairs now filled with water.
Was expecting a bit, but not as high as this, and I am concerned about how high it's now going to get. And I wondered if I ought to move some more stuff upstairs, really.
So you didn't get all the furniture up in time?
Well, there's nowhere for it to go.
No.
It's only a small cottage, so the upstairs is full.
These floods are exceptional. This house hasn't flooded for 24 years. It means people who wouldn't expect their homes to fill with water have suddenly had to deal with situations like this. And here, at least, the river levels are still rising.
Down the road, you can't tell where Jack's garden ends and the river begins. The tenant he rents the house to got out before the water got in.
It's just horrendous.
How are you feeling?
Upset and angry and scared to know what we've got to find and to what we've got to do to put everything right again.
This village is one of many affected, as across the country, hundreds of homes have now flooded.
I spoke to people in the East Midlands who had been affected and talking to them about how devastating the impact of flooding is. I just want people to be reassured that the Environment Agency has got people on the ground in all the affected areas.
In Shropshire, flood defences protected parts of the village of Ironbridge from the swollen River Severn. But others couldn't keep the water out, with people doing what they could to try to stay safe. while up in York, parts of the city centre were flooded as the River Ouse burst its banks. In Oxfordshire, water ran down the high street in Chalgrove as fields across the county resembled lakes. In places like Worcester, they'll only know the full extent of the damage as the water begins to recede. As it does so, there's a warning of ice and frost with a health alert issued for England as the weather continues to make life miserable for thousands of people across the country. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Nottinghamshire.
Well, let's bring in our meteorologist, Kirsty McCabe now. So what does this mean for people in flooded areas the next few days? What does the forecast look like? Is there more rain on the horizon?
Very little rain now on the forecast. There are a few showers around today, but generally the weather is settling down. We had a really strong jet stream. That's weakened and buckled now, and that means high pressure can build and high pressure settles things down. So that's the good news. We still have obviously a lot of water, a lot of standing water and spray. We've still got the runoff from the fields, so it's still worth keeping an eye. There are still plenty of flood alerts and warnings in force at the moment, but the general trend is that things improve in terms of rainfall, but we're seeing a real change now. We're going to see something much colder.
Yes, and warnings about that cold weather.
Absolutely. So for public health services across England now have been alerted that we're expecting this cold spell of weather. So temperatures will be around or below average for most of us, and it's this trend's developing through the weekend and especially next week. So by day we're looking at maybe 4 to 6 Celsius, so colder, much colder than it's been, and then very cold overnight. Obviously, we're looking at frosty conditions, temperatures dipping down well below freezing. I think the important things to note will be because we've got such damp surfaces, so much water around, we'll see a risk of ice, also freezing fog in places as well, and so that can be on its own quite hazardous. No sign of any significant snow at the moment. There could be a few wintry showers around. We will notice quite a lot of wind chill, though. We're going to see quite cold winds coming from the northeast, especially across southern parts of England. And I don't know if you know, across Scandinavia, it's been extremely cold there, temperatures down in the -30s. So we're going to start seeing some colder air heading our way. Thankfully, not that cold.
Not that cold. Goodness me, I don't own enough thermals for that kind of temperature. But Kirsty, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now, in about 10 minutes' time, I'm going to be speaking to the chair of Worcester City Council's Environment Committee, Karen Lewing, hearing how the community there has been coping since the River Severn burst its banks earlier on this week. Now, the Metropolitan Police has confirmed that it's investigating the Post Office over potential fraud offences relating to the wrongful prosecution of hundreds of sub-postmasters. Well, Molly Malone is here with me and has more on this. And this is one of those stories that shocks you every time you read about it, isn't it? So what's the latest development?
Yeah, this is quite a big development, symbolically at least for the victims that have been going through this for decades. Between 1999 and 2015, hundreds of them, up to 700 people that owned and managed post offices right up and down the country were wrongfully investigated, convicted, prosecuted for basically what amounted to a faulty computer system, which when they were cashing up in those post offices made it look like they were taking money and cashing in when actually it was an imbalance and problems with this Horizon computer system. Now, as you say, it's been going on for years and years and years, and we've seen high court battles, we've seen prosecutions, we've seen so much over the decades, but now the Met Police have confirmed that they're investigating various different strands of this, and in a statement they said they're investigating potential offences of perjury and perverting the course of justice. These potential offences arise out of investigations and prosecutions carried out by the Post Office. They went on to say 2 people have been interviewed on caution. Nobody has been arrested. The Met is also investigating potential fraud offences. This is the part we think's new, arising out of these prosecutions. For examples, money recovered from sub-postmasters as a result of prosecutions or civil actions. And that's referring, of course, to the fact that these postmasters, many of them went bankrupt because they were forced to pay back money that it looked like they were cashing away. Now, this is a story that really transcends party politics. So many politicians have been fighting on behalf of the victims. It also goes deep into the public. There's this ITV drama out this week. I've been watching it. Really shows an
and illustrates the plight of these people. It's not clear exactly what this Met Police investigation will do kind of in the immediate future, but at the very least it's fresh cause for the victims of what has been an ongoing saga for over 2 decades.
Yeah, it really keeps the focus on as well, doesn't it? And lots of them still out of pocket. So I'm sure we'll hear more developments. Molly, thanks very much indeed. Let's take a look now at some of the other stories making the news this morning. And the US Secretary of State will hold more talks with various leaders in the Middle East as the United States looks to calm tensions there. Antony Blinken arrived in Turkey as part of a new diplomatic push to stop the spillover from the Gaza war into Lebanon and Red Sea shipping lanes. At least 4 people, including a child, have died in a suspected arson attack on a passenger train in Bangladesh's capital, Dhaka. The incident comes on the eve of a tense general election, which the main opposition party is boycotting. Members of Oscar Pistorius' family have told Sky News that he's not the same man who was taken into custody 11 years ago. The former Paralympic champion's family claim he suffered numerous hardships while in prison, but believe he served his time. They also said that Mr. Pistorius doesn't have plans for the immediate future other than looking for a job. Today's cut to national insurance will bring a welcome pay boost to millions of workers across the UK. So let's take a look at some of the changes. National insurance will be cut from 12% to 10% on employee earnings between £12,570 and £50,270 from today. A person earning the UK's average salary of £35,000 will save £450 a year or £37.38 a month as a result of this change. Well, let's cross Westminster and bring in our political correspondent, Rob Powell, now. Hi there, Rob. So, a boost for many workers here, this national insurance cut, but as far as other tax cuts are concerned, it's not yet known whether or not the Chancellor is likely to go that route.
Yeah, that's right, Anna. In November, this was the centrepiece of the autumn statement that Jeremy Hunt delivered. There was 2 other national insurance changes announced for self-employed people as well. Those will come in at the start of the next tax year in April. This one was brought forward probably because of the looming election. I think we can probably expect more tax cuts when Jeremy Hunt delivers the full budget in March because of voters going to the polls likely in the back half of this year. On what they might be or if they might happen, Jeremy Hunt was remaining coy, though. Have a listen.
Even after the effect of the tax rises that have happened previously, this means that a typical family will see their taxes go down next year. It's the start of a process. As Chancellor, if I can afford to go further, I will. I don't yet know if I can. But we want to do this because it helps families and it also helps to grow the economy.
The Chancellor's words there on taxes going down for an average family. A big part of how this tax cut is being paid for is by other stealthy tax rises, in particular the freeze to allowances and thresholds. So the amount you can earn before you start paying tax and national insurance and the amount you earn before you are bumped up into higher tax brackets. Those have remained frozen. They haven't been rising with inflation. Now, the think tank, the IFS, has factored that into today's tax cut, and you do get a different picture. So for someone on the average £35,000 salary, you talked about the £450 tax cut they will get. Actually, if you factor in the freeze, that comes down to a £130 benefit. For those who earn a bit more, they will gain more. But if you're on £29,000 salary or less, overall, you will likely lose out. And I think if you look over the long term, because these thresholds and allowances are staying frozen, almost everyone will lose out. So yes, average families gaining this year, but over the long term, personal taxation is still rising. So a better way to think of this is probably the Chancellor giving back some of what he's raising in stealthy tax rises elsewhere.
OK, Rob, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. And just to let you know that later on this morning at about 8:10, we're going to be speaking to Labour Party's chair, Annalise Dodds, to get their reaction to the latest national insurance reduction and the ongoing flooding situation across the UK. To the US now, where the Supreme Court has agreed to hear Donald Trump's appeal over Colorado's decision to ban him from its presidential primary elections over his involvement in the US Capitol riot 3 years ago. It's a ruling that promises to have profound implications for this year's presidential election, as our US correspondent James Matthews reports.
This was the walk-on to the election trail 2024. In stepping forward, Joe Biden looked back on politics past, reflected in the present.
There's something dangerous happening in America.
The campaign film before the live event had already pitched the message that January the 6th was an assault on US democracy, that he defended it then and he's defending it now. Biden travelled to Valley Forge, where George Washington, America's first president, once spoke to his troops of democracy as a sacred cause.
The President of the United States, Joe Biden.
America's 46th president said, same.
Whether democracy is still America's sacred cause is the most urgent question of our time. And it's what the 2024 election is all about. The choice is clear. Donald Trump's campaign is about him, not America, not you. Donald Trump's campaign is obsessed with the past, not the future. He's willing to sacrifice our democracy.
Breach the line. We need backup.
Elevating January the 6th signifies a tweak in the Biden strategy. He's fought the long game, principally on his record in government, but it's left him tied with Donald Trump in the polls and behind in key states. Placing an insurrection front and centre builds a referendum on his rival. The man in question built a Biden comedy routine in a subsequent speech in Iowa.
Did you see him? He was stuttering through the whole thing. He's a threat to democracy. I'm a threat. They've weaponized government. He's saying, I'm a threat to democracy. He's a threat to democracy. Well, okay. Couldn't read the word.
Amidst competing versions of January the 6th, the event itself and the fallout, Joe Biden's advisors talk about this coming election as a public's first chance to deliver its judgment. They say their hope is that when voters see democracy on the line, they will vote to protect it. There is much about this election that looks and feels like the one before. January the 6th and everything it signifies is threaded through both. James Matthews, Sky News, in Washington.
Well, let's return to our top story now, and the severe flooding impacting parts of the UK. Well, in Worcester, the floodwaters are slowly beginning to recede, which means that residents will now be able to assess the damage caused to their homes and gardens. Well, let's get the latest situation now. Karen Lewing is chair of the Environment Committee and Green Party councillor for Worcester City Council. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Tell us a little bit about how the floods have affected your local area and what the situation is now.
Okay, so the rain has obviously caused the river to be very fast flowing and get to about 5.55 metres high. And that means that it's affected roads, play areas, car parks and the racecourse. People who've got flood defences have put them up. These are the houses, the terraced houses that sit along the River Severn. And you'll see the fast flowing of the river. That's actually an image of the racecourse. And you can see that it looks like the river. It's very powerful water.
Yeah, extraordinary. And what about people's homes and businesses? Have they been affected?
Yeah, well, you can see the houses on Waterworks Road, which is in my ward. They have got gates and pumps to get the water out. And the key thing is the warning system in the first place to make sure that people can get these up. Which they did this time. We've got some restaurants in town that have got their flood defences up as well and are closed business at the moment, but hopefully opening at the beginning of the week, next week.
Well, yeah, how much support is the council able to give those people who are affected?
Yeah, well, I think because we are used to being flooded, we do have them quite frequently. Obviously, it's increasing the intensity of it, the amount of it. So, you know, this is our third flood this winter already, and that's much more than they used to be. But it's a coordinated response with Worcestershire Highways. And of course, when the water does recede, we've got a clean-up team where they have to basically clear all the mud and and stuff that's all over the road and all over like benches and bins and play areas.
So something that people of Worcester have sadly had to get used to, and something that you're saying is happening more frequently. So has enough been done? Are the flood defences adequate enough? What would you like to see done?
I think what concerns me is that the defences take you to a certain height, and if we are going to get higher rivers and higher levels, I do worry that they're not going to be high enough. At the moment, they look like they're okay. We've done a lot of work in the last, I'd say, 15 years. 2007, we had a really bad flood. 2020, we had a really bad flood. And I think that the actual private and public sector are working much better together now. We have flood action groups across the city. The city council rings up residents and alerts them quite early. We still do get some cars left in our car parks that flood, but the car park machines have to be moved out and the car parks get closed. But sometimes people don't heed the warning and leave their cars there. So that's a real shame.
Yeah, horrible to come back to a flooded car, of course.
Yeah.
Well, Karen Lewing, good luck to you and to everybody there, and hope that the waters recede soon. Thanks very much indeed.
OK, thank you.
Now then, Jackie's here with the sport. So miserable when you see people's homes being flooded. I just can't think of anything worse.
I know, and you just wouldn't imagine at the time rushing to get family photos.
Yeah.
You just sort of get the dog and the cats and whatever of it and get out, and you would just lose so much amazing
and it takes so long to dry
memories.
Out, clear up. I know, absolutely horrendous.
No, it is horrible.
Sport-wise, a few worries for Rafa Nadal.
Oh my goodness, devastation in the Beltrao house. We're such Rafa fans. Oh, his final year, it's going to start well in Australia, and it looks like he's injured again. He might not even make the Australian Open, which starts next weekend. That was awful. We've also got some big boxing news which happened overnight. Maybe a bit of a surprise. Anthony Joshua set for another showdown in Saudi Arabia. Plus, as we said, more injury heartbreak for Rafa, just a week away from the first Grand Slam of the year. How bad is it? And we'll bring you the best of the action and a great couple of goals from last night's games in the FA Cup third round.
Morning everybody, it is 8 o'clock. You're very welcome to join us on Sky News wherever you're watching us. Chancellor will be joining us in just a few moments' time.
Evidence of the cost of living crisis. And we'll start with breaking news. There's only one place to start this morning against the dollar ever.
It's like night fell.
It's 5 o'clock. This is the News Hour. I'm Mark Austin. Coming up in the next 60 minutes.
Welcome to the Politics Hub on the UK Tonight throughout the course of the week. Still to come.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News at the Old Bailey.
Welcome back. Big weekend in the FA Cup, and the Premier League teams who are in it this weekend hoping to avoid replays, to avoid that fixture congestion. Well, Spurs did manage to do that last night. Let's have a look.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Hearing you talk about the difficulties of winning the treble specifically, did the challenge of it somehow make you feel almost alive in a way that you haven't felt in previous seasons, because you were competing in such huge moments and winning?
We need that as a club, not just me, that I need it, not just the players, I think they need it, all the organization, I think we need to say, wow. And not just the results can put in the place where you have to be. And important is overcome the situation, because you can anticipate, oh, be careful, because it will be difficult.
Do you feel that you, as a group, get the credit for what you did achieve last year by winning the treble?
Absolutely, we got the credit, absolutely. And it doesn't matter if you, as an environment outside the media, give us credit, but the credit gives to us how nice it was, how difficult it was, and it's now belong to us, you know. Always is not nice, the compliments, but the compliments I had to put in the balance that is because just you win. We're doing the same. If you don't win, it's a chaos, it's a disaster, it's a bad situation. So I'm so sorry, but we are judged, it depends on the results, not. I would like to be judged, it depends of what we deserve.
Was there a moment last season, talking about the treble again, when you felt that you were going to win it, or was it literally when you won that final and the final whistle went? Was there a moment before that where you looked at the team and you thought, this is going to happen?
Always we convince ourselves that was the year. So, especially, when we arrive and quarterfinal, semi-final against Madrid again, in the Premier League we fought an end, and after it looks like that universe, this season is, sometimes universe intervene. We don't accept it, but intervene in a good or bad moment. Sometimes you have to work thinking that universe is not there, but is there. And sometimes the coin is with you, sometimes against, and you have to sometimes accept it. Always I had to believe last season that the destiny was already written, and it was the year. And we talk a lot, this is the year, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And we are positive here, you are winning games, the positive here is at the end, that action that it is safe. And when you are not positive, you have doubts, and that is not for worse for the manager or the player. It's been built for the process, for details, for examples. It's been built. And when that's happened, and at the end, and that's why when people repeat the treble, it happened once in a lifetime. That it's happened very often. I don't put pressure at all to the team for myself to travel. We have done it. I'm sorry. It will be easy, it will be a lot incredible team have done it before. And I will believe that for the people who win the Premier League will be a big disaster, but after, we're going to fight for that I know myself and all my players, it's going to happen. But when you're going to win, for the people it will be a failure, but it will not be, because we cannot win all the time, every single season. The people is waiting no win, except our fans. People are desperate to win, that's normal. I will have that same feeling. The same one, but all the statements, opponents, everything, it's normal. It's again City, they're boring, man. Win another one, it's normal. You have to try to avoid it, but all the people waiting. We don't win, the people is so happy. Not just the contenders, everyone. I will have the same feeling. When one team and I winning all the time, come on, lose one year happen. But that is the challenge, to fight against all. Except us, against all, and try it, accepting that the people don't win forever. Some teams don't win forever, not in any sports, in any, except you are Michael Jordan, but we are not, so.
Were you joking when you said about retiring at the end of the season if you repeat the treble? Was that a joke?
Of course it was not a joke. Of course it was not a joke. No, I have spoke with the players this season, so forget about the titles, forget about it, these kind of things. In the short term, short view, what we have to do, this is the most important thing.
Take us back to June the 7th, ahead of the game, because you'd had such an amazing run to the final. Were you quietly confident?
I was, and I remember coming in and saying, you know, how did the other semi-final go? And
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Thanks, Jackie. Let's take a look at the weather now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weather's turning drier and cooler, but for the moment we still have a fair amount of cloudy, damp weather over parts of England. It's a chilly start, a little bit cooler than we've been used to. Under the clearer skies in the west, we've got a few patches of mist and fog and some frost as well. It's going to be quite a gloomy day in the east, under that blanket of cloud and patchy rain, but elsewhere there'll be more sunshine with just a few showers. Some of the showers will be rather heavy, though, at first, and during the afternoon the showers in the west should begin to ease off a little.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
You're watching Sky News Breakfast. We're going to be looking at the papers again in a moment, including focusing on why storm after storm has made Britain a sopping wet sponge. That's according to the Daily Express this morning. We're going to be looking at the effort to clean up flood-hit communities, as well as the day's other headlines in our paper review. Up next. Hello, very good morning. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Our top story today, and there are still flood warnings in place across the country. But the better news is that the rain is expected to ease off this weekend, giving some communities a chance to at least begin clean-up operations. Well, one of those places is Shrewsbury, and we can go there now and speak to our next guest, who's Anna Ewers-Clark, and she's also a vet at the Blue Cross. And I think you might have your dog with you. Yes, Bluey is with you. Joey, rather, is with you. We'll talk a little bit about what floods can mean for pets in a moment. But first of all, tell us a little bit about what the situation is like in Shrewsbury at the moment. How badly affected have people been there?
We have a lot of flooding in this area, unfortunately. A lot of the roads have been closed, a lot of places like car parks. The city centre in particular has been really badly hit. So it has had quite a big impact on us in the local community. Definitely been changing the ways that we get around, the way that we can sort of stay safe. We are sort of an area that is prone to flooding. So I think we all are quite prepared, but even some of those flood defences unfortunately have been failing this time round. So it is a case of kind of staying safe, staying prepared and doing everything we can, especially as a pet owner. It has been affecting where we've been going for our walks and things like that. So yeah, definitely staying safe and trying to stay dry.
Well, yeah, and for some people in the area, I know they've said that their homes or businesses have been flooded for the third time in less than 12 months. I mean, as you say, not the first time that the area's been hit.
Yes, it is something that we're seeing quite frequently at the moment, and especially with the kind of wet ground. I think there's just less place for the rain to go. So it does seem to be becoming quite a frequent thing. We live in a village and the local bridge floods. So we have to be very mindful of that and make sure we are staying safe.
Yeah, and the Environment Agency, I think, has said that the river levels around you are likely to remain high for several days, even though the rain, we hope, the forecast is that it's going to ease off. So give us a little bit of insight into to pets. As you're a vet, give us an idea of how animals can be affected with floods like this and what people can do.
So I think it's something where we don't always think about our pets and how much it can impact on them, especially cats can be really disorientated by floodwater. It changes how they sort of see things and how they recognise things. And they obviously aren't the best at water. So trying to make sure if you are in an area that's got a lot of very severe flooding, you may need to consider whether you want to keep them inside if that doesn't stress them out too much. And another thing we'd always recommend anyway, but especially if there's severe weather around, is to make sure your pet's microchip details are up to date. So if your pet were to get lost, get disorientated, they can be reunited with you. So little things you can do there for your pets. Also with dogs, we know that a lot of dogs are quite keen swimmers. Mine avoid the water, but a lot of dogs do really like to swim. But avoiding any rivers, even streams at the moment that are affected by the flooding, because the currents can be very, very strong, even if it doesn't look like it from the surface. And obviously that can be very, very dangerous if your pet gets swept away. But even smaller things like if you go into a field and there's flood water, keeping your dog on the lead, keeping them away from that water, because you can't see what's below the surface. There could be sharp twigs or rocks under there that could injure your pet. So just staying away from floodwater and staying safe yourself as well.
OK, well, Anna Ewers-Clark, really helpful advice. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks to Joey for being so well behaved during that interview. We appreciate it. And, of course, our sympathies to anyone who's been affected and their business or home affected by the floods. Thanks for your time. Thank you. Now, time to take another look at the morning papers. Here with me reviewing them today are the broadcaster Esther Craicu and the community editor and columnist at The National, Shona Craven. So welcome back to both of you. And actually, we're kicking off with floods, aren't we, Esther? Because a number of the front pages have photographs of people's communities devastated, sometimes not for the first time, by floodwater. And here's the inside spread in the Express and their take on it.
Yeah, so this is one of the wettest Januaries on record. And obviously, the floods have completely devastated so many communities. I mean, Nottinghamshire has been a county that's been particularly hit hardest by this, with hundreds of properties near the River Trent, the bank of the River Trent, being flooded in East London. Over 50 people have had to be evacuated after after a canal burst its banks in Hackney. One of the, obviously, criticisms of the government is the fact that the flood defences currently are not fit for purpose, and that's something that Keir Starmer has said that, you know, if he should win the next general election, that's something that he would tackle. But obviously, the floods minister is saying that funding is not the issue. The government has doubled, apparently, funding to go to flood defences of over £5.2 billion. So this is obviously a conversation of why does this keep happening? Every time there's some sort of extreme weather event, the country's infrastructure just can't seem to keep up. I mean, last summer we had a very hot summer on record, and you literally had tarmac at Luton Airport melting. So the question is, what is it with this country that doesn't seem to function during extreme weather events? And this is a prime example. I mean, you've literally seen people on basically kayaks rowing in the neighbourhoods. Homes have been flooded. Bins aren't being collected as a result. There's obviously the question of hygiene and rat infestation. And so this is a very serious event.
Well, yes, and it's not like you get flooded one day and you're OK the next when it stops raining. I mean, this is something that can go on for months and even longer, the impact that's felt. So there are questions each time there's a flood about whether we can do more to build up our flood defences. Do you feel that those questions are being addressed?
Well, I mean, with this caveat of how much money can there be, but, you know, as Esther says, you know, we've got these extremes of temperature. It's not like we're planning for one particular event. I mean, the map that the Daily Express has of all these flags of flooding in England and Wales is pretty shocking. How do you target your resources when it's large parts of a country that are affected? There's a really impactful statement from a professor of hydrology saying storm after storm this autumn and winter has made Britain a sopping wet sponge and there is nowhere for any extra rain to go. And so faced with that, I mean, no amount of money can resolve this once it's happened, but the prevention questions, I think, will, you know, possibly feed into some of the discussions in this election year.
Yeah, exactly. It will certainly be on the voters in those areas' minds, won't it? Anyone who's been affected will want to get answers, I'm sure. So it's interesting to see what the political parties might say in the run-up to an election. In the meantime, though, take us on to a different subject here, Shona, because the front page of the Times focuses on the Post Office and this whole Horizon scandal whereby sub-postmasters lost money, were prosecuted, some went to prison over an IT system that didn't work. They were blamed. The story moves on. Tell us what the Times says.
Yeah, so the headline is Post Office faces police inquiry over IT scandal. And I think anyone who has followed this on any level will think, well, I should bloomin' well hope so, and about time. How can it possibly have taken this long? So the Metropolitan Police say their detectives are looking at potential fraud offences, and this is committed between 1999 and 2015. So, I mean, I can't understand at all how it can have taken this long. It's not clear exactly if it's the Post Office as a whole, as a corporate entity that's been investigated, or individuals. But there are individuals who absolutely, categorically knew that this wasn't a case of hundreds of previously honest people suddenly starting to dip into tills.
It certainly should have raised suspicions.
Well, yeah,
and there were so many people in the same situation.
Yeah, and people affected have said they were gaslit, they were repeatedly told, no, it's not, we've not had any other problems from anyone else. So individual people, I think without doubt, you know, gave those assurances or made those accusations knowing that something was up at some stage. So I really hope people will get, you know, satisfaction from some kind of additional, you know, criminal investigation. What struck me in this piece, this has been in the spotlight due to an ITV drama called Mr. Bates versus the Post Office. And so there will be people who are learning about this for the first time and be completely staggered that innocent people were not only required to pay this money out of their own pocket, which I think would really surprise a lot of people, but then put in prison. Yeah, bankrupted, and people went to prison, people took their own lives following this. But what's interesting to me, it says 50 new potential victims contacted lawyers after this ITV drama was broadcast, including 5 who wished to appeal against their conviction. I'm kind of amazed there's still people who haven't yet come forward, but then the trauma of that experience actually may have meant that some of them couldn't even You know, read the news stories that have come before now.
And some people still haven't got compensation for it. They're still out of pocket after all these years. And we're talking, you know, nearly 20
Some people have died waiting for this to be remedied. I suspect one of the main issues would have been the institutional lack of institutional integrity. So even if you suspected that there was a glitch in the software, you know, how do you get it up the hierarchy chain to actually address it? Would there have been enough public resources to actually try and address this? I think people knew, well, this issue became known well before, you know, 2015 when this whole scandal officially ended. But I don't think they either had the resources or they could talk to people, or they just didn't want to actually have to face the public shame of this event.
Yeah, it's a very big issue, and there is a public inquiry going on, isn't there? So we may well hear more on different levels over the weeks and months ahead. In the meantime, though, we are out of time already, but you'll be back again in the next hour. Lots more to talk about then. For the moment, though, Shona and Esther, thanks very much indeed. Do stay with us. We've got lots coming up for you, including the US presidential race seemingly kicks off with Donald Trump and Joe Biden trading blows. But will Mr. Trump even be on the ballot? We'll be discussing that next.
It's the global elite, isn't it? It's those in positions of power across governments, oil companies, media barons, banks, those who have persisted with the destruction of nature and with continuing with fossil fuel expansion year after year, when we have known unequivocally that it was going to drive what's happening now. Disaster. We're seeing it daily on our news screens, if you look. The catastrophe is fatal, and those people in power are not being held to account.
Well, I'm a bit mystified about the idea of global elites 125,000 years ago. I think the willingness to find blame or assign blame to people who've long been in their graves is a little bit odd. I wonder how the measurements are made of temperature 125,000 years ago. How can one be sure that what is touted as the hottest period since God knows when really is that? It's very difficult to believe that the statistics adduced about global temperatures so long ago are really credible.
The point is, if I drop this glass, which I'm not going to do because I'm non-violent and I don't like breaking things, if I drop this, it will break. That's gravity, isn't it? Like, denying that putting more carbon in the atmosphere causes global heating is absolutely insane. We know that. We've known it for 150 years. It's unequivocal. We know that the people in power know full well that what they are doing will drive mass death, and yet they are still doing it.
The fact is that you're measuring apples with pears when you're comparing the sedimentary record of 125,000 years ago, which is sampled every few centuries by scientists, to what's taken every few weeks about global temperatures today. It's an entirely different procedure. I believe that industrialization in this last century has raised the temperature of the Earth. It'd be very strange if it hadn't. That's one thing. To suggest that anybody who differs from that is basically bordering on genocidal is the way we debate matters now. It's not scientific, it's to do with emotions. And that really won't suffice if we want a way forward to deal with global warming.
Let's return to the US now, where the Supreme Court has agreed to hear Donald Trump's appeal over Colorado's decision to ban him from its presidential primary elections. It's a ruling that's likely to have wide implications for this year's presidential election. Well, let's look at the potential next steps for Donald Trump with Scott Lucas, who's Professor of US and International Politics at University College Dublin Clinton Institute, and the Republican strategist Amy Tarkanian. Very good morning to both of you. Thanks so much for talking to us this morning. Scott Lucas, President Biden delivered a speech last night on the eve of the anniversary of the January the 6th riots, he argued that democracy and fundamental freedoms are under threat if the former President Donald Trump were to return to the White House. How much do you think the events of January the 6th and the issue of democracy will be a key issue for this election?
Well, it's not just a key issue for this election. Let's take it beyond politics, which is to set out the facts. And that is that 3 years ago on this day, what actually happened in the United States. And I'm not using this term for clickbait, but reality is it was an attempted coup. It was an attempt by Trump and his supporters to overturn the 2020 election after months of deception, misinformation, disinformation, by encouraging people to attack the U.S. Capitol. The first time the U.S. Capitol had been attacked by American citizens, as opposed to the British when they attacked it in 1814. Since then, Donald Trump has not backed off of what is that ongoing attempt to break the U.S. system. He's continued to repeat the lies, repeat the disinformation. I'm sure your viewers know all about the piling up of the legal troubles around his businesses and around his attempt to overturn the election and his mishandling of government documents. 91 felony counts in 4 different cases. What we have here, and I'm taking this beyond Joe Biden, doesn't matter if Joe Biden said it, doesn't matter if Robert Kennedy Jr. said it, doesn't matter if my mom or dad said it. That is that you have Donald Trump versus the U.S. political and legal system. There is no in between here. You know, even if Trump legally gets elected, as opposed to staging a coup in 2025, he will try to take down the American system as it's currently constituted. This is the most serious challenge to America, its political, its legal system, since 1865.
And of course, Donald Trump would say that he did nothing of the sort. He would say he's done absolutely nothing wrong. And meanwhile, Amy, Democrats will have a lot of sympathy with the argument that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy in the light of the events of January the 6th and his reluctance to concede defeat. But will it change many Republican minds about Donald Trump, do you think, this argument?
Well, we're dealing with 2 separate elections within one election. We have a primary and then we have a general. And I believe the primary base, it most likely are not going to be phased. They actually believe that what Donald Trump did on January 6th was valid. And they actually believe that it was an inside job and that the FBI and the government were actually at fault to some extent for stirring the pot that day. Now you have your general voters, and I call those your more reasonable and rational Republicans. And those are probably even more of your more moderates. And those Republicans actually believe that that day was incredibly embarrassing. It was a dark day. It was a disappointing day. And it was a day that really, I think should ban Donald Trump from running. But once again, he has not been convicted of being an insurrectionist yet. And I think not only January 6th was terrible, but let's take it even a step further. He now has what were called fake electors. And I'm from a state called Nevada. And in Nevada, we actually had 6 fake electors that were recently indicted. And they tried to decertify the election. So it just didn't happen on that day of January 6th. It continued, and it's still continuing to this day, of where they're trying to pinpoint these individuals who are willing to throw themselves on the railroad tracks for Donald Trump, claiming that the election had systemic voter fraud and that Biden is not the legitimate president.
The truth is, Scott Lucas, isn't it, that Republicans and Democrats will have their views. They're unlikely to shift them. I mean, is anything, reminders of January the 6th, our legal action even, going to change any minds on either side?
I think we need to get back to fundamentals for 2 reasons. I think the first is that quite often the Donald Trump tactic, and it's very successful, is to lead the media by the nose to the point of saying, well, you know, it's either me or it's the enemy. And therefore, what happens is that the media doesn't cover the issues. And we're talking about serious issues, whether you talk about immigration, the economy, education, healthcare, women's rights, LGBT rights, dealing with threats from Russia's invasion of Ukraine to the Israel-Gaza war. Instead of talking about those issues and indeed talking about other Republican candidates, say like a Nikki Haley or a Ron DeSantis, it's always Trump, Trump, Trump. And when you suck all the oxygen out of the room, then the media misses the second point. This is not Republican versus Democrat. Sure.
I'm so sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to give Amy one more word as well, because I want to be balanced and we're running out of time. So, Amy, I think you voted for Trump in the past, didn't you? It sounds like you're critical of him now, but what do you think the outcome is going to be? Will he be the nominee and could he win the election?
He very well could, which is ludicrous. I actually thought for a while there that President Biden, as terrible of a job as that he's been doing, would squeak by. But I spoke to a very high-profile Democrat friend of mine yesterday, and he actually said he's afraid that Donald Trump could possibly win. And that was the first I've actually heard that come out of his mouth. And I think that's terrifying.
OK, well, Amy Tarkanian and Scott Lucas, apologies for being short of time, but we really appreciate you giving us up your time. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Let's take a look now at what the weather's doing.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weather is turning drier and cooler, but for the moment we still have a fair amount of cloudy, damp weather over parts of England. It's a chilly start, a little cooler than we've been used to. Under the clearer skies in the west, we've got a few patches of mist and fog and some frost as well. It'll be quite a gloomy day in the east under that blanket of cloud and patchy rain, but elsewhere there'll be more sunshine with just a few showers. Some of those showers will be rather heavy at first. During the afternoon, the showers in the west should begin to ease off a little bit, and overnight the temperatures will drop a little lower than last night. Most of us will see a frost and some patchy mist and fog, and eastern areas will remain fairly cloudy.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Hello, it's 8 o'clock. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Our top stories here this morning. Temperatures across England with a cold weather alert, warning of icy conditions and a risk to the vulnerable. Meanwhile, more than 240 flood warnings remain in place as communities begin the clear-up following Storm Henk. The Metropolitan Police confirms it's investigating the Post Office over potential fraud offences relating to the wrongful prosecution of hundreds of sub-postmasters. Also ahead, a boost for workers as national insurance is cut, but the Chancellor admits he doesn't yet know if taxes will drop before the next election. And Sky News sees papers that reveal Rishi Sunak had doubts the government's Rwanda scheme would solve small boat crossings when he was Chancellor.
In sports, Anthony Joshua is set to fight the former mixed martial arts star Francis Ngannou in Saudi Arabia. And Tottenham are into the fourth round of the FA Cup as they beat Burnley thanks to a wonder goal from Pedro Porro.
Hello, very good morning. Welcome to Sky News Breakfast. After days of heavy flooding, people in England have been told to brace themselves for more bad weather as a yellow alert for cold temperatures comes into effect later this morning. While the rain may be easing off, the warning means there's an increased risk of ice and fog, threatening to bring a different kind of havoc to those already struggling in the aftermath of Storm Henk. Well, the alert from the UK Health Security Agency covers the whole of England from 9 o'clock this morning, and it lasts until midday on January the 12th. Forecasters say the combination of overnight freezing temperatures and saturated ground means we're likely to see increased frost, fog and icy conditions. And the alert warns that there's increased risk of death to vulnerable people, including the over 65s and those with underlying health conditions. Well, this cold weather comes as more than 1,000 homes were flooded due to heavy rain. As of this morning, there are more than 240 flood warnings and 260 flood alerts in place across England. Well, joining me now from Torquay in Lincolnshire is our correspondent Fraser Maud. A very good morning to you, Fraser. Tell us what the last few days have been like for people living where you are.
Yeah, good morning. Well, where we are here at Torksey Lock, it's still very much a watching brief. The river levels here, the River Trent, is still rising. It's also at the confluence with the Fossdyke Navigation, which is the main canal joining Lincoln to Gainsborough. There's a pumping station here just behind me. That's been going flat out for the last 3 weeks now, non-stop, trying to balance the river levels here. The River Trent is actually just over the way there. The Fossdyke Navigation is under this sea of water here, and if we look further up there, there's a white sign up there that indicates where, effectively a road sign, a canal map for where it joins the River Trent, telling you which way is which. So we're very close to the River Trent. It's the River Trent and the River Severn that are the main concerns at the moment. If you look at the flood warnings map, there is a sea of orange and red following the path of the Severn and following the path of the Trent all the way down. Most areas alongside those two rivers are under some form of flood alert or flood warning. There are 2 flood warnings in place where I am, 20 flood alerts in this area alone. Around 100 properties in Lincolnshire have been flooded and had to be evacuated. Around 1,000 properties throughout the whole of England have suffered as a result of this flooding. The levels here at the moment, the last reading about an hour or so ago by the Environment Agency showed that the river level here was at 7.37 metres, which means that it's already higher than its last highest recorded level, which was in November 2000 at 7.31 metres, and the water is still rising. Flood defences have been put in place since then in the last 20 years, which means that even though the level is higher, the amount of flooding and damage to properties and so on isn't quite as great as it was back in 2000. So to some extent, those flood defences have clearly been doing their job. And Rishi Sunak today is saying that people should have confidence in the Environment Agency. He's been saying that they are acting and operating appropriately and with all due haste. Labour, meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer, saying that the government, that Rishi Sunak has fallen asleep at the wheel, and that the flood defences and the flood management programmes that the government have got in place simply aren't fit for purpose. But for a lot of people in this area, at least, where levels are still rising, elsewhere in the country, thankfully, they are now falling. There is still cause for some concern, although the Environment Agency doesn't believe that levels will become high enough to threaten any buildings apart from a caravan park, a static caravan park just over the way there, where a number of properties, a number of those static caravans have got floodwaters up to the doors, and they've had a loss of power there as well. So concerns at the moment, watching those river levels rise. The Environment Agency confident that it won't cause any more flooding of properties, but of course we wait and see.
We do indeed. Fraser, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's get more from our meteorologist, Kirsty McCabe now. So, Kirsty, miserable for anyone affected by floods, but what do the next few days mean for those affected areas?
Well, we're still watching at the moment because obviously we've had so much rainfall that there's still the runoff into the rivers from the fields. So it's still something where some of the levels may still rise, and that's why there are still hundreds of flood warnings still in force. But the good news is that there's not going to be much more rain falling from the sky. So in terms of that, things are quietening down. But to put it in perspective, just the first few days of January, some places have already had their monthly rainfall for the whole of January. And the winter period as a whole, December, for example, some places saw 200% of the monthly rainfall. So it's been a very wet spell of weather up till now. And that's why it's been such an issue. It's been low pressure after low pressure after low pressure. We've had all the storms rattling through. It does look as though things will improve, but it is going to be a real change.
Well, yes, and warnings about how cold it could get.
Exactly, yeah. There are some public health service alerts out now for the cold weather, and that's really a heads up for social services, care homes and so on, to be aware that we're looking at a cold spell affecting the whole of the UK, although the warning is only one that's issued for England, but the whole of the UK, the British Isles, are going to see a much colder spell. Temperatures next week will be widely 4 to 6 Celsius at best, so below average, not exceptionally cold, but much colder than we've had, and then that means at night, of course, we're going to see widespread frost. Because the ground's so wet, we're looking at an ice risk for many. There'll be freezing, fog problems as well. We should hopefully see some sunshine. I think that's very welcome news, but quite a significant wind chill as we bring in much colder air from Scandinavia, where there at the moment they've been down to -30 and colder.
Oh my goodness, doesn't bear thinking about. That's so cold. OK, Kirsty, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now, the Metropolitan Police has confirmed that it's investigating the Post Office over potential fraud offences relating to the wrongful prosecution of hundreds of sub-postmasters. It said that 2 people have been interviewed under caution, but no one has been arrested. Former sub-postmasters and postmistresses were held liable by the Post Office for financial discrepancies thrown up by its computerised accounting system, Horizon. Well, let's get more on this. Molly Malone is here with me. Hi there, Molly. Really awful, this whole saga that still continues. So what is this latest development then?
Yeah, I think this latest development by the Met Police will be seen, at the very least, as a symbolic intervention for the victims who have been victim to this saga for 2 decades. 20 years this has been going on. As you said, between 1999 and 2015, hundreds of people that owned and operated post offices right across the country were wrongfully convicted in some cases, in others investigated and prosecuted for what basically amounted to accounting failures on the part of this computer software by Horizon. Now, it's been going on for many years. We've seen a public inquiry launch. We've seen massive high court battles. But now this intervention by the Met Police confirming that they're investigating various different strands of this story. And they said in this statement that they're investigating potential offences of perjury and perverting the course of justice. These potential offences arise out of investigations and prosecutions carried out by the Post Office. They go on to say 2 people have been interviewed under caution. Nobody's been arrested. The Met is also investigating potential fraud offences, which we think is the new part, arising out of these prosecutions. For example, money recovered from sub-postmasters as a result of prosecutions or civil actions. Now, that's referring to the fact that many workers were, of course, bankrupted because they were forced to pay back the money that it appeared that they had lost when they were cashing up and this computing system making it look like they were at a loss that they had to make up. Now, this story that's been going on for 2 decades has got massive kind of political and public momentum behind it. It really does transcend party politics. We've had politicians on both sides behind the victims in their 2-decade-long battle. There's been this ITV drama, which I've watched it. It really goes to the heart of what the human story was in this, the human plight for years and years and years not believed. And it's led to a real surge of sympathy, I think. We've seen also this petition, which has now got over 500,000 signatories to it, calling for the former chief executive of the Post Office, Paula Venables, to lose her CB. I think, as we've seen over the past 2 decades, we can expect this to only continue. It's not entirely clear what this intervention by the Met Police will do for the kind of current immediate status quo, but I think for the victims, it will feel like a big deal to them.
Yeah, OK, and plenty more to hear on this subject, I'm sure, over the months ahead. Thanks very much indeed, Molly. Thank you. Now, today's cut to national insurance will bring a welcome pay boost to millions of workers across the UK. So let's take a look at the changes. National insurance will be cut from 12% to 10% on employee earnings between £12,570 and £50,270 from today. A person earning the UK's average salary of £35,000 will save £450 a year or £37.38 a month as a result of this change. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, remained positive about potential tax cuts in the future if the government could afford it.
Even after the effect of the tax rises that have happened previously, this means that a typical family will see their taxes go down next year. It's the start of a process. As Chancellor, if I can afford to go further, I will. I don't yet know if I can. But we want to do this because it helps families and it also helps to grow the economy.
Now, Sky News has seen papers which show that Rishi Sunak had doubts that the government's Rwanda scheme would help stop small boat crossings back when he was Chancellor. Well, let's find out more. Our political correspondent Rob Powell's at Westminster for us. Hi there, Rob. So what do these papers say then?
Yeah, these are documents that we've seen, Anna, and were prepared in March 2022 by number 10 Downing Street. At the time, Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. And what they outline is essentially the perspective from number 10 on where the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, was on the Rwanda asylum scheme 1 month before it was announced. And they show he had significant doubts about whether it would work and about the cost of it as well. It shows a split, essentially, between what Rishi Sunak thought and what the view was in 10 Downing Street. It outlines how the Chancellor had doubts about whether it would stop small boat crossings, whether it would work as a deterrent. One part of it says the Chancellor wants to pursue smaller volumes initially, 500 instead of 1,500 in the first year, in terms of people being sent to Rwanda. There's also another part where it says that the Chancellor believes the deterrent won't work and that he's reluctant to fund so-called Greek-style reception centres where migrants could be housed. Now, in response to this, a current government source has said that while Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, he funded the Rwanda scheme and said that when he became Prime Minister, he immediately put it at the centre of his plan for government and is now passing legislation to try and get flights to Rwanda and to get the scheme up and running to address some of the concerns from the Supreme Court. I think the reason why these documents matter, though, is Rishi Sunak, I think, is preparing in the weeks and months ahead for something of a battle with those on the right of his party and those on his backbenches that want to see him take a tougher approach to the legislation that could potentially mean that flights are able to go to Rwanda. There are doubts about whether that legislation would work and doubts about whether Rishi Sunak is going far enough. And I think for those on the right of the party, they will point to these documents and they will point to some of the concerns Rishi Sunak had as Chancellor and suggest that that is why, in their view, he is not going far enough, as they see it anyway, right now while he is in Downing Street.
OK, Rob, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's get some reaction to those developments. I can bring in the Labour Party chair, Annalise Dodds, now. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us. I wonder what your thoughts are on that story that our political correspondent was just taking us through there, that we've seen number 10 documents from 2022 suggesting that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, when Chancellor, had serious doubts over whether the Rwanda plan would work. What do you make of that? Is his heart in the scheme, do you think? Do you think he should drop it?
Good morning. Well, I think yet again, this shows that Rishi Sunak, as the Prime Minister, will always put his party above the interests of our country. He himself, it appears, had doubts about this scheme, and Labour's been crystal clear. £400 million have gone, it seems, to Rwanda. We've had more visits from Conservative foreign secretaries to Rwanda than we've seen people being sent there to be processed. This is an eye-wateringly expensive scheme, one which will not work, one which is not doing anything to break up those criminal smuggling gangs. And of course, prosecutions of those gangs have actually gone down under the Conservatives in recent years. And it seems now that the Prime Minister was even aware of some of these problems, but he's done nothing about them because of his focus on internal Conservative Party management, not looking to what will work for our country, instead looking to what will work for his party. He's just too weak to be leading our country now, and I would say yet another reason why we need change and why we need a general election.
I wonder if we can talk about national insurance now, because the cut to national insurance comes into effect today. It will affect 27 million people. That many will benefit, and it's worth a total of £9 billion. The government says it's the biggest tax cut on record for workers. So do you welcome it?
This, of course, is in a context where we've seen 25 tax rises since just the last general election. And what the Chancellor, Conservative Chancellor, is doing here is effectively giving people back £2 out of every £10 extra in tax that his government is levying. So in practice, this is not going to be the huge boon for families that the government is presenting it as. And I think, quite frankly, people watching this programme are well aware of this. They know about the money in their pocket and in their bank accounts. They know that so often they're under pressure, that our economy has not been growing, that they're subject to more taxation and will be subject to more taxation in years yet to come than we've seen since the Second World War. You know, an incredibly high tax burden under the Conservatives, and yet low growth as well. So this really is smoke and mirrors, I think, coming from the Conservatives right now.
So what would Labour do about it? I mean, the cut to national insurance will no doubt be welcomed by those who get to benefit from it, but the government has frozen the income tax threshold, which basically amounts to a de facto tax rise. So would Labour unfreeze those tax thresholds?
Well, Labour's been clear that we don't believe that working people should be paying the price for Conservative economic mismanagement. But
Does that mean that you will unfreeze those tax thresholds?
Well, I was just going to go on to say, but what that means is that we're not going to be making any unfunded tax commitments. We've seen the cost of that for our economy with what happened under Liz Truss when she said she would radically cut tax. And that actually led to a huge economic crisis. And many people who pay mortgages, who've had those mortgages remortgaged recently, they've really felt that in their pocket, because that extra Tory mortgage payment really has been something they've been subject to. And, you know, lots and lots of families this year having to remortgage and still seeing that impact. So Labour's not going to be making unfunded tax commitments in the way that we've seen under the Conservatives. We will set out our full tax plans before the next general election, but there will be that big difference, as I said. We'll be clear about where the money's coming from. And, you know, we would be taking different choices on tax than the Conservatives at the moment. Why are they leaving money on the table from non-DOMs, people who live in our country, but who don't pay the same amount of tax as others? We would get rid of that big tax break for often very wealthy people, and we'd be putting that money into our NHS right now.
You say you make different decisions to the government. If the Chancellor were to cut taxes further in the budget, which he says he will do as and when they can afford to, would a Labour government keep them or put taxes back up if it came into power?
We've seen a huge amount of rumour from the Conservatives about what they might do or might not do around taxation. I think the British public are going to focus on delivery. And the delivery, I'm afraid, under the Conservatives has been 25 tax rises since the last general election, shifting our country towards the highest level of taxation since the Second World War, falling and stagnating living standards and an economy that's growing far slower than it did under Labour governments. And we're determined to turn that around, to get our economy growing again, put it on a far more secure footing and actually get people's living standards increasing. That's always what's going to be most important for the Labour Party.
I just want to get your view on the floods that we've seen across large swathes of the country in the last day or so. Labour has said that it'll make flood defences fit for purpose, but how will you do that and how will you pay for it?
Well, this is clearly an awful situation for huge numbers of people, particularly those who've had to leave their homes and whose homes have been appallingly damaged. And of course, this is just the beginning for many of them of what will be many, many months of a very, very difficult time. But we do feel there's got to be much more of a focus from government on this area. Back in October, Labour called for government to make sure that they were joining this up, that they had the National Task Force focused on flooding that we believe is necessary. We believe that needs to happen every winter in advance of the kind of floods that I'm afraid many people were predicting back at that stage, back in autumn. That's why Labour called for action then. The National Audit Office also was saying that government needed to sort out its strategy in this area, that they needed to be working, for example, with local authorities, with the emergency services, so that they could ensure that flood defences were being put into place, because quite a lot of the money that's been allocated hasn't even yet been spent around flood defences. So we do believe there needs to be change. Unfortunately, the Conservatives have been asleep at the wheel on this. They've not held that task force that Labour was calling for. But I think just the last thing I would want to say is, while we're speaking on the television about this right now, there are emergency service workers, council workers, Environment Agency workers, and indeed volunteers out up and down our country are trying to deal with all of this. And I just really want to thank them for what they are doing to try and really keep people safe during this very, very worrying time.
OK, Annalise Dodds, we appreciate your time this morning. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Let's take a look now at some of the other stories making the news this morning. And the US Supreme Court has agreed to hear Donald Trump's appeal over Colorado's decision to ban him from its presidential primary elections. Colorado is just one of many states arguing that the former president should be disqualified from running for office because of his failure to try and stop the US Capitol riot 3 years ago. An Alaskan Airlines flight bound for California was forced to make an emergency landing in Oregon after a window and a chunk of the fuselage came off mid-flight. The plane landed safely with 180 passengers and crew on board, and the incident is now being investigated by the National Transportation Safety Board. At least 4 people, including a child, have died in a suspected arson attack on a passenger train in Bangladesh's capital, Dhaka. The incident comes on the eve of a tense general election, which the main opposition party is boycotting. Now, the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has begun his diplomatic tour of the Middle East in Turkey, where he's due to hold talks with various leaders across the region in the coming days. Well, let's cross live to Jerusalem now. Sky's Nicole Johnson is there for us this morning. And Nicole, what can we expect from this visit, do you think?
Well, he'll have a number of main focuses. One of them will be to try and contain the regional escalation from the spillout of the war inside Gaza. We've had the Houthis in Yemen attacking cargo ships, fighting up on the Lebanese border, attacks on US bases inside Iraq. So there is a real concern that it could spill over. It's an extensive tour and it's his 4th to the region, not only Turkey, but he'll also be going to Saudi Arabia, to Qatar, to the United Arab Emirates, to Jordan, to Turkey, to Israel and to the occupied West Bank. Here he'll be pressuring the Israeli government to try and reduce the number of people being killed inside Gaza. Palestinian health officials say more than 22,000 people have been killed. He'll also be looking for some kind of answer on what Israel's plan is for Gaza, for who will govern it and how it will be rebuilt once the war is over. And again, they'll be trying to pressure the Israeli government to move to its third phase of this war, which is more targeted strikes. For people inside Gaza, they're not expecting very much out of this trip at all. They've seen Blinken come and go, and the situation there has gone from bad to worse. In fact, the UN's chief humanitarian boss, in effect, has said that the Gaza Strip has been devastated to such an extent that it is now uninhabitable. So for people inside Gaza, they'll be watching Blinken's visit with interest, but really they're holding out very little hope that the situation there will improve anytime soon.
OK, Nicole, thanks very much indeed. There in Jerusalem, thank you. Now then, let's find out what's happening in the world of sport. Jackie is standing by as ever, and you've got all sorts this morning, haven't you? Tennis, boxing, and
I do. Well, overnight news with Anthony Joshua. Isn't it funny? A few years ago, if you say where are all the big heavyweight fights, you go, oh, Vegas, or maybe Madison Square Garden, and then for a bit it was Wembley, and now Saudi Arabia, obviously.
Yeah.
Obviously, because overnight, Anthony Joshua is set for another showdown in Saudi. We'll have the details of that. Plus, is it yet more injury heartbreak for Rafa Nadal, just a week away from the Australian Open? And we'll bring you the best of the action and a couple of really great goals from last night's games in the FA Cup third round. All to come.
Morning, everybody. It is 8 o'clock. You're very welcome to join us on Sky News wherever you're watching us. Chancellor will be joining us in just a few moments' time.
Evidence of the cost of living crisis. We'll start with breaking news. There's only one place to start this morning. Against the dollar ever.
It was like night fell.
It's 5 o'clock. This is the News Hour. I'm Mark Austin. Coming up in the next 60 minutes.
Welcome to the Politics Hub on the UK Tonight throughout the course of the week. Still to come.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News at the Old Bailey.
Big weekend of FA Cup action. It was a pretty good night last night, though, for Spurs. Let's take a look.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Hearing you talk about the difficulties of winning the treble specifically, did the challenge of it somehow make you feel almost alive in a way that you haven't felt in previous seasons, because you were competing in such huge moments and winning?
We need that as a club, not just me, that I need it, not just the players, I think they need it, all the organization, I think we need to say, wow. And not just the results can put in the place where you have to be. And the important is overcome the situation, because you can anticipate, oh, be careful, because it will be difficult.
Do you feel that you, as a group, get the credit for what you did achieve last year by winning the treble?
Absolutely, we got the credit, absolutely. And it doesn't matter if you, as a environment outside the media, give us credit, but the credit gives to us how nice it was, how difficult it was, and it's enough, belong to us, you know. Always is not nice, the compliments, but the compliments I have to put in the balance that is because just you win. We're doing the same. If you don't win, it's a chaos, it's a disaster, it's a bad situation. So I'm so sorry, but we are judged, it depends on the results, not. I would like to be judged, it depends of what we deserve.
Was there a moment last season, talking about the treble again, when you felt that you were going to win it, or was it literally when you won that final and the final whistle went? Was there a moment before that where you looked at the team and you thought, this is going to happen?
Always we convince ourselves that was the year. So, especially, when we arrive and quarterfinal, semi-final against Madrid again, in the Premier League we fought an end, and after it looks like that universe, this season is, sometimes universe intervene. We won't accept it, but intervene in a good or bad moment. Sometimes you have to work thinking that universe is not there, but is there. And sometimes the coin is with you, sometimes against, and you have to sometimes accept it. Always I have to believe last season that the destiny was already written, and it was the year. And we talk a lot, this is the year, what's going to happen, it's going to happen. And we are positive here, you are winning games, the positive here is at the end, that action that it is safe. And when you are not positive, you have doubts. And that is not for worse for the manager or the player. It's been built for the process, for details, for examples. It's been built. And when that's happened, and at the end, and that's why when people repeat the travel, it happened once in a lifetime, that. It's happened very often. I don't put pressure at all to the team for myself to travel. We have done it. I'm sorry. It would be easy, it will be a lot incredible team have done it before. And I will believe that for the people who win the Premier League will be a big disaster, but after, we're going to fight for that I know myself and all my players, it's going to happen. But when you're going to win, for the people it will be a failure, but it will not be, because we cannot win all the time, every single season. The people is waiting no win, except our fans. People are desperate to win, that's normal. I will have that same feeling, the same one, for all the statements, opponents, everything. It's normal. It's against City, they're boring, then win another one. It's normal. You have to try to avoid it, but all the people waiting. We don't win, the people is so happy. Not just the contenders, everyone. I will have the same feeling. When one team and I winning all the time, come on, lose one year happen. But that is the challenge, to fight against all, except us, against all. And try it, accepting that the people don't win forever. Some teams don't win forever, not in any sports, in any, except you are Michael Jordan, but we are not, so.
Were you joking when you said about retiring at the end of the season if you repeat the treble? Was that a joke?
Of course it was not a joke. Of course it was not a joke. No, I have spoken with the player.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Thanks, Jackie. Let's take a look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weather is turning drier and cooler, but for the moment, we still have a fair amount of cloudy, damp weather over parts of England. It's a chilly start, a little cooler than we've been used to. Under the clearer skies in the west, we've got a few patches of mist and fog and some frost as well. It'll be quite a gloomy day in the east under that blanket of cloud and patchy rain, but elsewhere there will be more sunshine with just a few showers. Some of those showers will be rather heavy at first. During the afternoon, though, the showers should begin to ease off a little.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Coming up, we're going to be taking you through the papers once again, including the news that former Paralympian Oscar Pistorius has been released from prison on parole. That's making the papers. We'll be talking about that in a moment. Hello, very good morning. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. We're going to dive into the papers once again. Here with me to discuss them are the broadcaster Esther Keku and the community editor and columnist at The National, Shona Craven. Very good morning to both of you. We're actually going to take people through the front pages, I think, before we chat to you. So hold fire and let's look at those front pages, shall we? Because The Guardian is leading with Labour accusing Rishi Sunak of being asleep at the wheel over the government's response to severe flooding. The Times reports on the Post Office facing a police inquiry over the IT scandal which saw hundreds of sub-postmasters wrongly convicted. Prince Andrew is the subject of the Daily Mail's front page, which calls on the Met to reinvestigate claims of sexual assault. The Telegraph leads with the resignation of the former Energy Minister Chris Skidmore over the government's plans to allow the extraction of fossil fuels from the North Sea. And goodbye, darling Derek. The Mirror pays tribute to the husband of TV presenter Kate Garraway, who passed away after a long battle with COVID. So let's chat about the papers now with Esther Craicu and Shona Craven as well. Welcome back to both of you. And a lot of those front pages that we've just shown people, we've discussed those issues in the previous hours, but this hour we wanted to delve inside and look at some of the stories there. And we're kicking off with the Times, aren't we, Esther? And this is reflecting on the release yesterday of Oscar Pistorius in South Africa after serving an 11-year sentence.
Yes, for the murder of his former girlfriend, Reva Steenkamp. I remember this case so well in 2013. It feels like it's kind of come back full circle. You had this really distressed Oscar Pistorius in court, basically throwing up throughout the entirety of the trial, really distressed for shooting his girlfriend. He claims that he thought she was an intruder and that he heard screaming in the bathroom, and he leapt to action. Anyway, her family are really distressed by the fact that he's been released on parole. He's going to be banned.
It's actually after 6 years. I got it wrong. It was 11 years ago, but it was
6 years of his sentence. Yeah, he's going to be banned from consuming alcohol, and he'll have to complete community service alongside also having to go to therapy to deal with his anger management issues. But obviously, Reva's family are saying that they don't believe he's a changed man, and that they're really disappointed with this decision. They think he still poses a threat to the public, and his former girlfriends have come out and said that while they were with him, he did show signs of anger management issues. But this story I still think is incredible. I mean, this came out right after, I think, Valentine's Day in 2013, when it was revealed that tragic death had happened. And now to see him out in the streets again is quite something.
Yeah, and Reva Steenkamp's family have said that they're the ones who are suffering the life sentence, having lost her. And of course, we talk a lot about Oscar Pistorius, but it's the victim we should be remembering in all of this, shouldn't we?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting because obviously you have full sympathy with the fact that this will haunt the rest of their lives. But I suppose when you're such a high-profile person, then the restrictions of, the conditions of this parole are strict, and he's really under the gaze of the media scrutiny so much.
He's not allowed to talk to them, is he?
No, well, and also the streets were barricaded while he was taken to, I think, a cottage at his uncle's house. I mean, yes, his family are wealthy to some extent. He has all this privilege, but journalists will be waiting to snap a photo, follow his every move. So, who needs a parole officer when you have the full glare of the South African media waiting for you to make any misstep so they can get you back to prison?
And the reason there's such fascination there, and actually around the world, was because he was such a big figure there, wasn't he? He was seen as something of a hero.
Yeah, and an inspirational figure as well.
Absolutely. I mean, a few months before, he was in London for the Paralympics. So this is someone that really had kind of international media. And also there was the issue of the fact that he had to have a retrial because the judge that was involved in his first sentencing was seen as too lenient. So, I mean, it was a complete spectacle at the time it happened, and it's kind of almost come full circle now.
Yeah, whether or not he will succeed in lying low will be interesting to see. Move us on, though, Shona, and take us to The Sun, because they have a double-page spread reflecting on the fact that there are so many elections around the world this year.
Yeah, so it's being dubbed the year of the election. It also mentions that some people are labelling it the year of the despots. Not sure if they're including Donald Trump as one of the despots or not, although he seems to be now self-identifying as a dictator, at least for part of the time. So we're going to have the US election in November. We may also have the UK election in November. I mean, that seems the most likely time. So I don't know.
Certainly what the Prime Minister's hinted, that he's minded.
Second half
yeah,
of the
well,
year,
second half of the year, and then if you're still going to have conference season in October. So they could be at the same time. And I mean, in some ways, quite a contrast in terms of certainly the age of the candidates, but then maybe you could say, wealth and privilege and status are common denominators. Also, there's going to be elections in places like Russia and Belarus.
Wonder which way those will go.
Who knows what the outcome of those will be. But yeah, I suppose it is a bit more unpredictable what's going to happen in the US. I'm still not entirely clear if these are going to be the two candidates. Obviously, it's being positioned as Trump versus Biden. But I feel like anything could really happen between now and then in terms of criminal issues, in terms of health issues that might come up. So, yeah, loads of countries. I think it says in The Sun around half the world's population, a record 4 billion people, are eligible to go to the polls this year. I mean, whether people will necessarily bother in some of the countries where their vote perhaps doesn't count. But of course, in the UK, a lot of the votes won't count either because of our first past the post electoral system. So yeah, there's a lot going on, and it's sometimes we can be guilty, I think, in any country of really focusing on the minutiae of our election and our politics. But there are so many things in the world. One of the things it mentions is the potential use of rogue states meddling in other people's elections, using AI to flood social media with deep fake images, videos and messaging. I think that sort of
cut out for them.
I think that kind of Black Mirror future reality is probably already upon us, and it will become very difficult to spot what's real and what's fake.
And when you've got so many elections close together, whether or not the oversight is as sharp in those situations, and also it could herald real change in the world, couldn't it?
I mean, yeah, geopolitically, it's a very significant year. I mean, I think if we had to look at the top 5 elections, India is definitely up there. Obviously, the US, the EU Parliament, obviously the UK. I mean, it's going to be quite a significant year.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Covering it all here on Sky News, of course. Esther, take us on to The Guardian now. There's a story about cancer patients, and they're linking it to the impact of the strikes, aren't they?
Yeah, so apparently tens of thousands of cancer patients have had their appointments cancelled over the last 13 months. And obviously this wave of strikes being the longest on record, it's going to destabilise that even further. I mean, this is particularly significant because in terms of clinical outcomes, the UK has one of the lowest results when it comes to cancer in the developed world. I mean, it's on parity with Portugal, whose entire GDP is still less than what we spend on our NHS. So that's quite significant. But unfortunately, this is one of the downsides of the ongoing pay disputes within the NHS, and obviously the pressures mounting on the government to try and tackle that as soon as possible.
Well, yeah, and I think we're day 4, are we, of a 6-day strike by junior doctors at the moment. So yes, whether or not there'll be any shift in positions, we'll have to...
I mean, it's quite a negative report, really, when it mentions that there's no sign of an end in strike to the dispute, in sight to the dispute. But it is worth noting that the potential of industrial action by junior doctors in Scotland was averted and a deal was reached. I believe Hamza Yousaf and Michael Matheson, Scottish Health Secretary, have offered to help mediate in England, but have been rebuffed.
OK, interesting stuff. We haven't got very long, but I'm really interested in your story in the Mirror, Shona. The headline in itself is intriguing. You may have to spell it out for me.
Yes.
Loo drive me mad.
Loo drive me mad. So it's about the most annoying household habits that have been reported. I mean, it is a bathroom supply firm who've done the poll. We could be slightly sceptical about the fact that it's very toilet-dominated, but maybe not, because maybe these are the things that annoy people. Not replacing empty toilet paper rolls is the most annoying household habit. I wonder how many of these families have children in them, but it's that sense that maybe the bathroom fairies will come and remedy the situation and you don't have to lift a finger. Leaving wet towels on the bathroom floor as well.
I mean, that just baffles me. How do you leave a wet towel on the bathroom?
Because you think someone's coming in 5 minutes later to pick it up for you. If you live alone like I do, you will not be doing that because you will be the only one to suffer.
That's so strange.
I don't think I'm going to go into some of the other ones. Toilet-related ones, but just to say that I can see all of those are quite annoying, and I'm sure I'm not guilty of any of them.
Yeah.
Possibly I am. Anyway, we will leave it there. We can discuss loos as much as you like backstage, but we're out of time for this chat. Shona and Esther, really lovely to have your company this morning. Thanks so much. Do stay with us, though. We've got lots coming up for you. In fact, in a moment, we're going to be speaking to the experts behind a new Sky documentary exploring the dark world of illegal rhino poaching.
It's the global elite, isn't it? It's those in positions of power across governments, oil companies, media barons, banks, those who have persisted with the destruction of nature and with continuing with fossil fuel expansion year after year when we have known unequivocally that it was going to drive what's happening now. Disaster. We're seeing it daily on our news screens, if you look. The catastrophe is fatal, and those people in power are not being held to account.
Well, I'm a bit mystified about the idea of global elites 125,000 years ago. I think the willingness to find blame or assign blame to people who've long been in their graves is a little bit odd. I wonder how the measurements are made of temperature 125,000 years ago. How can one be sure that what is touted as the hottest period since God knows when, really is that. It's very difficult to believe that the statistics adduced about global temperatures so long ago are really credible.
The point is, if I drop this glass, which I'm not going to do because I'm non-violent and I don't like breaking things, if I drop this, it will break. That's gravity, isn't it? Like, denying that putting more carbon in the atmosphere causes global heating is absolutely insane. We know that. We've known it for 150 years. It's unequivocal. We know that the people in power know full well that what they are doing will drive mass death, and yet they are still doing it.
The fact is that you're measuring apples with pears when you're comparing the sedimentary record of 125,000 years ago, which is sampled every few centuries by scientists, to what's taken every a few weeks about global temperatures today. It's an entirely different procedure. I believe that industrialization in this last century has raised the temperature of the Earth. It'd be very strange if it hadn't. That's one thing. To suggest that anybody who differs from that is basically bordering on genocidal is the way we debate matters now. It's not scientific, it's to do with emotions. And that really won't suffice if we want a way forward to deal with global warming.
Now, the number of rhinos walking our planet is sadly getting smaller and smaller, and you won't be surprised to hear that it all comes down to the value of their horns, which, believe it or not, are worth more than gold. Well, now, a new Sky documentary is shining a light on why the illicit trade is still managing to thrive in 2024 and what could be done to catch those responsible. So let's take a look at a bit of it.
This all started as a weird little burglary in an auction house. It was shocking. Who steals a rhino head?
Rhino horn. So the social status.
Never seen so much money in my life.
They are deliberately trying to drive the rhino to extinction.
Well, I'm joined now by the filmmaker who put together the documentary, Will Lorimer, alongside Steve Galster, who's the founder of an anti-trafficking organisation. So, a very good morning. Thanks so much for talking to us today. Will Lorimer, tell us first of all a little bit more about this documentary and what inspired you to make it.
So the documentary really starts quite a long way away from sort of the persecution of the rhino. It starts with this really bizarre crime wave. And this was the thing that really attracted me to it. In 2011, you have a series of really unusual robberies where thieves in the UK and Ireland and Europe are targeting dusty natural history museums, regional natural history museums, and are making off with only one item, which is rhino horn. And I was intrigued by this and started trying to work out why this was happening and where the rhino horn was going and what the demand was for it. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized that there was this global criminal network that wasn't just targeting antique rhino horns, but actually, as the demand and the market grew, started targeting live rhinos in Southeast Asia, live rhinos in South Africa. And actually what the series becomes is this pretty extraordinary story of how when organized crime sees money to be made in an item, that they will stop at nothing to maximize the amount of money they can get from it.
And Steve Galster, you've made it your life's work to try to counter this illegal rhino horn trade, but give us an idea of why it exists. Clearly, rhino horn is seen as being very valuable, but why is that? It's hard to understand.
Well, there's a number of reasons. The traffickers have done a good job marketing it to as many things, like a cure for cancer, for other ailments. Also, it's marketed like a futures commodity, that if you hold on to it as the rhino numbers go down, the price will only go up. And in fact, that is what has happened. It's gone up to $65,000 a kilo. So it rivals the price of gold and cocaine at this point.
And tell us, expand a little bit on what Will was saying there about how these rhino horns are making it into the illegal trade. Are you seeing museums and collections being raided for it? And to what extent is this coming down to live rhinos being illegally hunted?
Well, sure. Due to the lucrative nature of this trade and the low risk of getting caught, you've got organized crime gangs that are involved. The market's mainly in Asia, so that's where the criminal gangs have set up. The series features in on a kingpin that we investigated, and they've set up a whole network to scoop up porn wherever they can, from the savannas of Africa to other markets within Asia itself, and even to museums across Europe.
It is the most extraordinary story, I have to say. I watched the first episode last night. And Will, what difference do you hope that it could make? Do you think it could have some impact raising awareness on this illegal rhino trade?
I think so. I think there's a bigger point as well, which the whole series, I hope, touches in on, which is if we value nature and we value natural resources only in terms of their monetary value, in terms of how much they're worth financially to us, we're sort of on course for chaos and quite a lot of environmental destruction. There's a vet who makes a really important point right at the end of the series, which is we need to understand that the future of the rhino is intricately linked to our own future. We're all part of one global ecosystem. And if we destroy them, if we don't look after them, we're going to really unwittingly compromise our own futures as well.
OK, well, Will Lorimer and Steve Gaster, a fascinating subject. Thank you so much for your time this morning to tell us a little bit more about it. Thank you. Let's check on the weather now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weather is turning drier and cooler, but for the moment, we still have a fair amount of cloudy, damp weather over parts of England. It's a chilly start, a little cooler than we've been used to, and under the clearer skies in the west, we've got a few patches of mist and fog and some frost as well. It'll be quite a gloomy day in the east under that blanket of cloud and patchy rain, but elsewhere there will be more sunshine with just a few showers. And some of those showers will be rather heavy at first. During the afternoon, the showers in the west should begin to ease off a little, and overnight the temperatures will drop a little bit lower than last night. More of us will see a frost and some patchy mist and fog, and eastern areas will remain fairly cloudy.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Hello, it's 9 o'clock. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Our top stories here this morning. Temperatures drop across England with a cold weather alert warning of icy conditions and a risk to the vulnerable. Meanwhile, more than 240 flood warnings remain in place as communities begin the clear-up following Storm Henk. The Metropolitan Police confirms it's investigating the Post Office over potential fraud offences relating to the wrongful prosecution of hundreds of sub-postmasters. Also ahead, Sky News sees papers that reveal Rishi Sunak had doubts the government's Rwanda scheme would solve small boat crossings when he was Chancellor. And a boost for workers as national insurance is cut, but the Chancellor admits he doesn't yet know if taxes will drop before the next election.
In sports, Anthony Joshua is set to fight the former mixed martial arts star Francis Ngannou in Saudi Arabia. And Tottenham Hotspur are into the fourth round of the FA Cup as they beat Burnley thanks to a wonder goal from Pedro Porro.
Hello, very good morning. Welcome to Sky News Breakfast. After days of heavy flooding, people in England have been told to brace themselves for more bad weather as a yellow alert for cold temperatures comes into effect later on this morning. While the rain may be easing off, the warning means that there's an increased risk of ice and fog, threatening to bring a different kind of havoc to those already struggling in the aftermath of Storm Henk. Well, the alert from the UK's Health Security Agency covers the whole of England from 9 o'clock this morning and lasts until midday on January the 12th. Forecasters say that the combination of overnight freezing temperatures and saturated ground mean that we're likely to see increased frost, fog and icy conditions. And the alert warns that there's an increased risk of death to vulnerable people, including the over 65s and those with underlying health conditions. Well, this cold weather comes as more than 1,000 homes were flooded due to heavy rain. As of this morning, there are more than 240 flood warnings and 260 flood alerts in place across England. Well, joining me now from Torksey in Lincolnshire is our correspondent Fraser Maud. Fraser, morning to you. Fill us in on what's been happening there then over the last 24 hours or so.
Yeah, good morning. Well, it's very much a watching brief at the moment. The river level up until about an hour or so ago was still rising, the River Trent. This is actually the Fossdyke navigation that you can see behind me here. It joins up with the River Trent about 300 metres or so behind me. It's a sort of T-junction, forms a sort of T-junction. And the levels here have been rising for the past 24 hours. They are now steady. Within the last hour, the Environment Agency has said that the levels are steadied at 7.38 metres above normal, which is quite a considerable distance above where it normally is, 4.65 metres. The record here was back in 2000, 7.31 metres, so it's already broken the record, but flood defences have done their job to an extent. I can have a chat with Neil Jupp here, the landlord of the local pub, the White Swan, just over the other side of the water there. Side, yeah. I mean, what would we normally see here?
Here, you'd see banks at each side, and from these pontoons all the way around the other side, that is just grassland usually, farmers' fields, horses, sheep, all over, and now it's obviously, as you can see, just one big lake. From the building down the bottom, there is a little holiday cottage down there that is just totally wiped out now.
And we've got the caravan park as well, which has lost
the other side of my pub. It's lost at least 20 or 30 caravans, and up until this morning, they weren't sleeping because it was creeping up and up and up. Like you say, till 7 o'clock this morning, it was still rising.
And you've been helping people out there, haven't you? You've got a few of them in your pub at the moment.
A few in the pub. They have free tea and coffees. They've obviously put the pub saying, if they want me, I'm on call 24/7. They can sleep on the floor, they can sleep wherever, just to keep warm and dry. Free coffees, free teas and a bit of heat.
You're doing a good job. You'll be very welcome, I'm sure, especially with the cold weather coming in now as well. It's starting to get this cold weather warning coming in, so we've got more to worry about. But the Environment Agency, according to the latest readings, the levels are now steady rather than rising, so that's good news.
Yes, just hope it's all true, and that's the biggest thing. If it is steady now and it don't rise, everyone can breathe, can't they? But we're scared that if it does go, and we've got a hell of a lot of older people around this area that are all old. So it's scary because if it goes around here, the evacuation is going to be.
In terms of what's happening, we've got temporary pumps going here because the main pumping station is not working.
Yes, so the main pumps have been down. I don't know how long they've been down. So they've been here for a week nearly, trying to sort things, and now they've got 3 to 9 temporary pumps trying to pump water, and it's not as good as your main pumps, obviously.
No, a temporary measure, but at the moment seems to be doing the job.
Holding on, yes.
Keeping the fingers crossed for that. The situation here is that the River Trent is steady. There are still 2 flood warnings in place for this area, about 20 flood alerts around this area as well. In Lincolnshire alone, 100 properties have been flooded. Across England, 1,000 properties. Labour say the governments have been falling asleep at the wheel and that their measures for dealing with floods and severe weather events aren't fit for purpose. Rishi Sunak says that we should have confidence in the Environment Agency that they are acting appropriately and with all due haste to try and sort the situation out. And the thing is, now that the rain has stopped after such a long period of rain, is moving this water around, getting it from one place to another without it causing flooding issues in other areas. That's a concern for a lot of people, certainly downriver from here, in that where this river water is going to go, is that going to affect them? In that case, we'll just have to wait and see. But it's fingers crossed here with the river level on the Trent at the moment steady.
OK, Fraser, we'll keep an eye on things there. Thanks very much indeed. In the meantime, let's bring in our meteorologist, Kirsty McCabe, who's here with me. Hi there, Kirsty. What do the next few days weather-wise mean for people in these areas?
I think time for everyone to breathe a little sigh of relief. We've still got a few showers around. We have still got the runoff from the fields, so the river catchment's still maybe increasing in some places, but it will start to improve. At the moment, though, obviously a lot of warnings are in force. But we can see the bigger picture is that high pressure is going to be building across the UK, and that means that we're going to see things settling down. So as the pressure builds, we'll keep the weather fronts at bay, it becomes much drier, but we will start to bring in much colder air. So currently in Scandinavia, temperatures there are widely below 30 degrees, minus 30 Celsius in places. It's not going to be that cold for us, but we start to drag in that colder air and we start to see a bit of a wind chill developing. The winds will be quite brisk across southern parts of the UK in particular. So the week ahead brings temperatures for many by day, just 4 or 5 at best. Some places may struggle to get above freezing, and overnight for most it's going to be sub-zero. So we're looking at some very cold nights ahead, and that means widespread frost, issues with fog and freezing fog, and of course ice will be quite a hazard as well, especially with the surfaces being so wet and damp at the moment.
So different kinds of issues there.
But I think we'd rather have this drier spell. It is good news, and there will be some sunshine.
Yes, some relief, as you say, for flooded areas. OK, Kirsty, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now, the Metropolitan Police has confirmed that it's investigating the Post Office over potential fraud offences relating to the wrongful prosecution of hundreds of sub-postmasters. It said that 2 people have been interviewed under caution, but nobody has been arrested. And former sub-postmasters and postmistresses were held liable by the Post Office for financial discrepancies thrown up by its computerised accounting system, Horizon. Well, let's bring in Molly Malone, who's here with me for more on this. Hi there, Molly. And this is such a saga that's gone on for so long and been so awful for so many people. So get us up to date then with this latest development.
Yeah, I think this is an intervention by the Met Police that for those that have been fighting this battle, for a lifelong battle for so many people, lasting for some of them over 2 decades, it will feel at the very least like a welcome intervention for them. In terms of how we got here, it's worth reminding, because there's been so many twists, haven't there? You constantly hear about this story, but it's a complicated one, not least for the people that are affected. It's hundreds of people between 1999 and 2015 that were wrongfully accused, some of them sent to prison, some of them convicted, others prosecuted, for basically what amounted to accounting problems with a computer software called Horizon in these post offices that were being managed by these people, but wrongfully accused of basically cashing in money and stealing money from these post offices. But actually, in the most part, it was this accounting problems with this software that basically was the kind of key problem that that's what happened. Now, it's been going on for years and years and years. We've had this statutory public inquiry. We've seen various different high court battles, and now this intervention by the Met Police confirming that they are investigating various different strands of the story. They say they're investigating potential offences of perjury and perverting the course of justice. These potential offences, they say, arise out of investigations and prosecutions carried out by the Post Office. They go on to say 2 people have been interviewed under caution. Nobody has been arrested. The Met is also investigating potential fraud offences arising out of these prosecutions, e.g. money recovered from sub-postmasters as a result of prosecutions or civil actions. Now, that's referring, of course, to the fact that so many of these workers were bankrupted because they were forced to pay back the money that was shown to be a loss on this computer software. Now, this is a story that goes to the heart of politics, but also for the public. We've seen this ITV drama really illustrating what has been a devastating plight for these victims for so many years. There's also this petition for the former chief executive of the Post Office to lose her CBE. That's now got over 500,000 signatories to it. I think today's intervention by the Met Police will feel very welcome for the people that are affected. It's not immediately clear how it changes the status quo right now, but I think at the very least a real symbolism for those people.
Yeah, indeed, Molly. And we haven't heard the last of this story, have we? Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now, Sky News has seen papers which show that Rishi Sunak had doubts that the government's Rwanda scheme would help stop small boat crossings back when he was Chancellor. Well, let's bring in our political correspondent, Rob Powell, who's at Westminster for us this morning. So, Rob, tell us a little bit more then about these papers and what they tell us.
Yeah, Anna, these are documents that were prepared in March 2 years ago, March 2022, while Boris Johnson was still Prime Minister. And the Downing Street papers seem to paint a picture of something of a split between the then Prime Minister and the then Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, about the viability of the Rwanda scheme and whether it would work or not, and whether it would represent value for money. They essentially outline the view of what the Chancellor's position was, saying that he didn't believe that it would act as a deterrent, that small boat crossings would continue as well, and that there was also concern about the volumes of people being sent to Rwanda and the cost as well. I can read you out a couple of quotes from the documents. The first says the Chancellor wants to pursue smaller volumes initially, 500 instead of 1,500 this year and 3,000 instead of 5,000 in years 2 or 3. That's the number of people going to Rwanda. In a separate bit, it says the Chancellor is refusing to fund any non-detained accommodation, for example, Greek-style reception centres, because hotels are cheaper. Now, the reason why I think this is relevant at the moment is that Rishi Sunak is preparing to bring back legislation that he says will solve some of the concerns the Supreme Court had about the Rwanda policy and allow flights to get off the ground. Now, there's a section of MPs within the Conservative Party that are concerned that that legislation doesn't go far enough. They want to see Rishi Sunak disregard some other parts of international law, and they are concerned about whether, in their view, he is willing to do what it takes to get it off the ground and to get it working. Revelations like this may only add to their concerns. In response to all of this, a current government source has said that Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, funded the Rwanda scheme, that when he became Prime Minister, made it one of his top 10 priorities, and has overseen the first drop in small boat crossings so far this year. They are down on where they were last year, but still up on where they were the year before.
OK, Rob, thanks very much indeed. Let's take a look now at some of the other stories making the news this morning. And the US Supreme Court has agreed to hear Donald Trump's appeal over Colorado's decision to ban him from its presidential primary elections. Colorado is just one of many states arguing that the former president should be disqualified from running for office because of his failure to try and stop the US Capitol riot 3 years ago. The US airline has temporarily grounded its plane after a flight bound for California was forced to make an emergency landing in Oregon after a window and a chunk of the fuselage came off mid-flight. The Alaska Airlines plane landed safely with 180 passengers and crew on board, and the incident is now being investigated by the National Transportation Safety Board. At least 4 people, including a child, have died in a suspected arson attack on a passenger train in Bangladesh's capital, Dhaka. The incident comes on the eve of a tense general election, which the main opposition party is boycotting. Now, today's cut to national insurance will bring a welcome pay boost to millions of workers across the UK. So let's take a look at the changes. National insurance will be cut from 12% to 10% on employee earnings between £12,570 and £50,270 from today. A person earning the UK's average salary of £35,000 will save £450 a year or £37.38 a month as a result of the change. The Chancellor Jeremy Hunt remained positive about potential tax cuts in the future if the government could afford it.
Even after the effect of the tax rises that have happened previously, this means that a typical family will see their taxes go down next year. It's the start of a process. As Chancellor, if I can afford to go further, I will. I don't yet know if I can. But we want to do this because it helps families and it also helps to grow the economy.
Let's get a view on this. Nicola Smith is the head of economics at the TUC and joins me now. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us. So cuts to national insurance come into effect today, benefiting 27 million people at a cost of £9 billion. Is that something that you welcome?
I think our concern about this approach is that we remain in a relentless cost of living squeeze. And, you know, these changes today come at enormous cost, £9 billion of future cuts to the NHS, to our kids' schools. And they do very little to address the scale of the fall in real wages and the pressures on family budgets that people are experiencing up and down the country. So, of course, at the moment, the last thing people need is higher taxes. But you have to see today's figures in the context of what's been happening to pay. You know, we'd see an average gain for someone from these taxes of £330 a year. The average worker's lost close to £15,000 a year because of pay growth failing to keep up with pre-crisis trends. So, you know, we need an answer to the cost of living pressures that people are facing, but cutting our way into it isn't the right approach.
OK, but the Chancellor has said that he's weighing up whether or not he can afford to give more tax cuts. Presumably that does put more money in people's pockets. So if there was a tax cut that would make a difference to your workers, which one would it be? What would you like to see him look at as a priority?
I think we'd like to see the Chancellor prioritise economic growth in a meaningful way. If you look at the figures we saw just before Christmas, we found that our economy is shrinking. And that means that the relentless pressures on people's pay packets are continuing. The government's own forecasters have shown that it won't be until 2028 that people can see their real wages get back to the place they were in 20 years ago. That's just completely unprecedented as a cost of living squeeze. And it's what's leaving family budgets under such pressure. We know that 4 in 10 people are struggling to pay their energy bills at the moment. The price of energy up 49%. Food up 28%, record numbers of people going to food banks, and unsecured debt in the next few years. That's people taking out credit cards, loans, also set to reach record highs. You know, the answer to this solution is strong economic growth that funds strong public services, and we don't think the government's approach is delivering.
OK, you're not satisfied with the government's approach. What about Labour's approach as well? They're not committing to certainly any tax cuts at the moment. Are you confident that Labour has working people in the front of their minds when it comes to taxation?
I think that any party needs to prioritise addressing living standards. That needs to be the central issue at the next election. And what we're looking for is political parties who will make commitments to investing in growth and investing in the public services that will get us there. We've currently got close to 8 million people waiting on an NHS waiting list. And, you know, that is clearly an impediment to what's happening in our jobs market and to helping people back into work. We want to see people arguing for fair taxes. Actually, these next cuts today we haven't talked about, but you know, they do disproportionately benefit those on higher incomes. And we've also got the government talking about cuts to inheritance tax, a tax that actually only affects the wealthiest 4% of people in the country. So you've got to question whether that approach is one that a government that was really concerned about living standards and public services would be taking. Why would you even be floating a tax giveaway to the very wealthiest at a time like this with such pressures on family budgets? So fair tax, decent investment and decent rights at work, banning things like those 0 hours contracts that we know leave people on hugely insecure positions with no certainty over where their next day's pay or work is going to come from. That's the sort of change we need and the sort of ambition we need, rather than spending huge amounts on tax cuts that give people a minimum wage a few pence more in their pay packets at the end of the week and don't address the bigger pressures people are facing.
OK, well, Nicola Smith, we appreciate your views there from the TUC. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has begun his diplomatic tour of the Middle East in Turkey, where he's due to hold talks with various leaders across the region in the coming days. Well, Sky's Nicole Johnson is in Jerusalem for us this morning. And, Nicole, what can we expect from this trip then?
Well, already we've seen Antony Blinken meeting with Turkey's foreign minister. He's going to have some tough conversations ahead. Turkey has been highly critical of Israel's war inside Gaza, but also hard conversations throughout the entire region. After Turkey, there'll be trips to Saudi Arabia, to Egypt, to Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, next week in Israel and the occupied West Bank. Antony Blinken will be trying to pressure the Israeli government to reduce the number of people being killed inside Gaza. Every day, Palestinian health authorities say that more than 100 people are being killed. He'll also want to try and get some sense of what Israel's plan is for Gaza after the war is over. And we have heard some preliminary proposals from some Israeli ministers about that. He'll also be encouraging them to change how this war is progressing, to stop the constant bombardment, aerial strikes, and to replace it with more targeted attacks. The other big issue, of course, is to try and contain any regional escalation. And already this morning, the Lebanese group Hezbollah is reporting that it has fired 62 rockets across the border towards an Israeli military observation post. Hezbollah says that that is its first response to the assassination of a leading figure from Hamas inside Beirut on Tuesday. So we'll have to wait to see how that progresses. But the entire region has been on edge, waiting to see how Hezbollah will respond.
OK, Nicole, one to watch. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now then, we've got the sport. Jackie's here, standing by. And we're worried about Rafa Nadal, aren't we?
I'm very worried about Rafa Nadal, because it was going to be his big farewell year. He was going to do like a party tour. Not really a party tour. He was just going to do like a party.
Big farewell tour.
Yeah, farewell to everyone, play all the tournaments. And he's now looking injured again, his first tournament back.
Yeah, so there are doubts over
drama. It's drama, it's tragedy, it's everything. It's not tragedy, I'm joking, it's sport.
But it is for you, you're a big fan.
I am a bit, it's tragedy. Huge fan. We're going to talk about that. Also, more on the big overnight boxing news with Anthony Joshua set for another showdown in Saudi. Plus, here it is, the injury heartbreak for Rafa a week away from the Australian Open. Will he be ready? And we'll bring you the best of the action and a couple of really brilliant goals from last night's games in the FA Cup third round.
Morning, everybody. It is 8 o'clock. You're very welcome to join us on Sky News wherever you're watching us. Chancellor will be joining us in just a few moments' time.
Evidence of the cost of living crisis. We'll start with breaking news. There's only one place to start this morning against the dollar ever.
It was like night fell.
It's 5 o'clock. This is the News Hour. I'm Mark Austin. Coming up in the next 60 minutes.
Welcome to the Politics Hub on the UK Tonight throughout the course of the week. Still to come.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the Grimmest case. the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
Welcome back. Absolute joy scenes last night for Pedro Porro after an absolutely brilliant goal in the FA Cup. Let's take a look.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Hearing you talk about the difficulties of winning the treble specifically, did the challenge of it somehow make you feel almost alive in a way that you haven't felt in previous seasons, because you were competing in such huge moments and winning?
We need that as a club, not just me, that I need it, not just the players, I think they need it, all the organization, I think we need to say, wow. And not just the results can put in the place where you have to be. And important is overcome the situation, because you can anticipate, oh, be careful, because it will be difficult.
Do you feel that you, as a group, get the credit for what you did achieve last year by winning the treble?
Absolutely, we got the credit. Absolutely. And it doesn't matter if you, as an environment outside the media, give us credit, but the credit gives to us how nice it was, how difficult it was, and it's enough, belong to us, you know. Always it's not nice, the compliments, but the compliments I have to put in the balance that is because just you win. We're doing the same. If you don't win, it's a chaos, it's a disaster, it's a bad situation. So I'm so sorry, but we are judged, it depends on the results. Not, I would like to be judged, it depends of what we deserve.
Was there a moment last season, talking about the treble again, when you felt that you were going to win it, or was it literally when you won that final and the final whistle went? Was there a moment before that where you looked at the team and you thought, this is going to happen?
Always we convince ourselves that was the year. So, especially, when we arrive and quarterfinal, semi-final against Madrid again, and the Premier League, we fought an end, and after, it looks like that universe, this season is, sometimes universe intervene. We don't accept it, but intervene in a good or bad moment. Sometimes you have to work thinking that universe is not there, but is there. And sometimes the coin is with you, sometimes against, and you have to sometimes accept it. Always I had to believe last season that the destiny was already written, and it was the year. And we talk a lot, this is the year, what's going to happen, it's going to happen. And we are positive here, you are winning games, the positive here is at the end, that action that it is safe. And when you are not positive, you have doubts, and that is not for worse for the manager of the player. It's been built for the process, for details, for examples. It's been built. And when that's happened, and at the end, and that's why when people repeat the treble, it happened once in a lifetime. You know that it's happened very often. I don't put pressure at all to the team for myself to travel. We have done it. I'm sorry. It would be easy. It will be a lot incredible teams have done it before. And I will believe that for the people who win the Premier League will be a big disaster. But after, we're going to fight for that. I know myself, I know my players. It's going to happen. But when you're going to win, for the people it will be a failure. But it will not be, because we cannot win all the time, every single season. The people is waiting no win, except our fans. People are desperate to win. That is normal. I will have that same feeling. The same one for all the statements, opponents, everything. It's normal. It's against City, Boring, man. Win another one. It's normal. You have to try to avoid it, but all the people waiting. We don't win, the people is so happy. Not just the contenders, everyone. I will have the same feeling. When one team and I are winning all the time, come on, lose one year happened. But that is the challenge, you know, to fight against all, except us, against all. And try it, accepting that the people don't win forever. Some teams don't win forever, not in any sports, in any, except you are Michael Jordan, but we are not, so.
Were you joking when you said about retiring at the end of the season if you repeat the treble? Was that a joke?
Of course it was not a joke. Of course it was not a joke. No, I have spoken with the players this season, so forget about the titles, forget about it, these kind of things. In the short term, short view, what we have to do, this is the most important thing.
Take us back to June the 7th, ahead of the game, because you'd had such an amazing run to the final. Were you quietly confident?
I was, and I remember coming in and saying, you know, how did the other semi-final go? And they said at the moment Baal's beating Fiorentina. I went, oh good, I think we might have a better chance against Baal than Fiorentina. And next time we come out, they said Fiorentina have won the game. I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be much tougher. So I went into it knowing that, you know, our record in Europe had been pretty good, we'd done okay, but this was probably going to be one of our biggest tests. And obviously Fiorentina, I had...
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Jackie, thanks very much indeed. It's going to get cold. Let's take a check on the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weather is turning drier and cooler, but for the moment we still have a fair amount of cloudy, damp weather over parts of England. It's a chilly start, a little bit cooler than we've been used to. Under the clearer skies in the west, we've got a few patches of mist and fog and some frost as well. It'll be quite a gloomy day in the east under that blanket of cloud and patchy rain, but elsewhere there will be more sunshine with just a few showers around. Some of those showers will be rather heavy at first, but during the afternoon, the showers in the west should begin to ease off a bit.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Do stay with us. Coming up, we'll hear firsthand how residents in Gloucestershire are coping with the floods. Hello, you're watching Sky News Breakfast. A reminder of our top stories here this morning. And a cold weather alert has come into effect in England, warning of risks to vulnerable people as communities across the country continue to grapple with severe flooding from Storm Henk. The Metropolitan Police has confirmed that it's investigating potential fraud offences relating to the Post Office IT scandal, which saw the wrongful prosecution of hundreds of post submasters. Sky News has seen papers that revealed that Rishi Sunak had doubts that the government's Rwanda scheme would solve small boat crossings back when he was Chancellor. And national insurance payments are cut for millions, but the Chancellor has admitted he doesn't know if taxes will drop before the next election. Now, the cost of living means more and more of us are choosing to staycation here in the UK. But it's a trend that's driving property prices up along the coast and forcing some locals to find a home elsewhere. It's an issue that could sway voters at the polls, as our political correspondent Serena Barker-Singh reports.
Down the beach every day with my dog, when they're running around playing in the sea or jumping around in the sand dunes. It's a really wholesome way of life.
Every day is a fight for Emma to stay in North Devon, where she's lived for most of her life. Short-term holiday lets have soared since the pandemic, she says, thinning out the housing stock.
The short-term let situation is really beginning to push local people out, because many people in this area are actually on the minimum wage. And if you work out somebody's income on a minimum wage and then what the actual rental prices are, they just don't match up at all.
UK coastal tourist hotspots boomed after the pandemic, injecting cash into the economy and attracting more permanent residents too. The southwest now has the highest concentration of holiday homes in England.
So do you like that it's a touristy part of the world?
I do, actually, I do, because you get, in the summer it's a lot busier, but then also in the winter it can be a bit smaller.
There's a shortage of local housing for local people. And on the other hand, it helps the tourist industry and encourages people to come here.
When Charlotte's tenancy ended, she struggled to find anything within her budget in her hometown of Barnstaple. Now relying on support from the council, she's found temporary accommodation, but miles away from her friends and family.
Do you think local people are bearing the brunt of this problem?
Yeah. People renting out and obviously doing B&Bs and hotels and stuff like that when there's people in the local area that are trying to find a home for their family and to be close to their own.
She says she now can't afford to drive to her job. The fuel cost has doubled. She's now stuck in limbo.
So we've had to try and unpack everything.
Do you think, is it hard to imagine having a permanent home in the future? Do you see that on the horizon?
Not at the moment. Everyone's saying to hold out and hopefully you'll find somewhere, but until you're in this situation, you don't know for yourself what it's really like.
The government is consulting on a registration scheme and ways to give councils more control, supported by local MPs.
Would you like to see them, for example, have caps on the amount of short-term lets in Devon?
If you can prove in a particular area there's a problem, there should be a limit to the amount of homes that can register as holiday lets in a certain area.
Do you think the central government is helping you in East Devon? Do you think these measures have come too late?
I think the national government is coming my way, actually. When we look at what they've done with regards to council tax, we look at what they're doing with the registration scheme, which is coming soon, and I'm working with them on that. We're going in the right direction. I wish it was quicker, but I always wish things were quicker.
Housing is set to play a major issue at the next general election. In fact, researchers have outlined 108 constituencies along the UK coast that a majority are held by the Tories, and they think they're vulnerable to changing hands in the next general election based on housing alone. It's what they're calling the sea wall. Devon is a prime example where pressures on social housing have never been more acute.
For voters like Emma, the cost of living crisis has also hit hard. A potent mix that could turn the tide in deep blue seats. Serena Barker-Singh, Sky News in Devon.
Let's go back to our top story now. And weather warnings are still in place across the UK as people have been forced to leave their homes due to flooding. Well, let's get to the situation from Gloucester now, where flooding has been particularly severe, residents having to evacuate their homes. Joining me is the Conservative MP for Gloucester, Richard Graham. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us. Get us up to date, first of all, with what it's like in your constituency at the moment when it comes to flooding.
So I think the situation has stabilised. The river is likely to be pretty high for a while to come because all the water is still coming down from the Welsh hills, but it's drier, it's colder, and that's what's anticipated to be the case for the next couple of days. So I think we will see levels dropping probably from this evening onwards. Around 80 people in my constituency have been flooded, some of them on an area on the island, which has flooded quite frequently, and some others in areas which haven't flooded since the big flood of 2007. So flooding is deeply unpleasant for anyone who has lived through it, and indeed we were flooded in 2007. But I think the emergency services, the council, the Environment Agency and so on have done their best to help with pumps, saws where trees have fallen down, and general advice on evacuation possibilities, including the use of our leisure centre.
Well, yes, and as you say, miserable for those people affected, and it's not the first time that your area has been affected. So I wonder whether you think enough's being done. This winter, the National Audit Office revealed that the number of properties to receive better protection from flooding by 2027 have been cut by 40%, and 500 of 2,000 new flood defence projects had been abandoned. Are you satisfied that enough is being done when it comes to protecting your area against flooding? Is enough happening?
So there are lots of different elements to that. I mean, householders or rentals have improved in one sense, which is the creation of flood re, which means that everybody can insure their homes against flooding. But of course, that doesn't stop them from being flooded. I think long term, the real challenge for us in England in particular is the distribution of water. Often there's too much in the winter, and quite often there's too little in the summer. So it's about how we can hold the water back and then use it in places like London, Thames Water there, who often run short of water. So at some stage, we are going to have to consider, I think, building a new reservoir in the Welsh Hills to hold back some of the water that comes down the River Severn and floods properties in Worcestershire and Gloucestershire. Tewkesbury, of course, is always the worst hit, and there are many more people there who've been flooded than here in Gloucester. And I do think that longer term, that would be a great investment for everybody to consider, public and private sector together.
OK, and I wonder, just while we have you, whether I can just get your thoughts on one other story that we've been reporting on this morning. And we have seen papers that show that Rishi Sunak, when he was a Chancellor, had doubts about the Rwanda scheme. He said that he didn't think that it could work as a deterrent. So what's your view on that? Should he just drop the scheme now, given that he had those concerns and clearly thought that it would be costly as well?
No, I think the Prime Minister has been very clear that the deterrence value of Rwanda is likely to be its key aspect, but we should also be able to get some asylum seekers processed through flying them to Kigali. And Migration Watch has been very clear that if it's a genuine feature of our processing, then it will have a strong deterrent impact. And I've no doubt that is the case, particularly for people coming from the Middle East and perhaps North and Central Africa.
Richard Graham, we appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much. And our best wishes to all those suffering from the flooding in your constituency. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Now then, Jackie has joined us again, and because you've got an interesting interview to do.
Yeah, it's one of my heroes, actually. I'm a real fangirl, but I will try and be as professional as possible. The FA
Hold
Cup,
it together.
I'm going to hold it together. The FA Cup is back in full swing with some moments of magic from last night's third-round games and some big fixtures coming up this weekend. Absolutely packed with FA Cup fixtures, all the big boys joining the third round. But I'm joined by former Arsenal player and Sky's very own commentator, Alan Smith. Morning to you, Smudge.
Morning, Jackie, how are you?
I'm good, yeah. Your last match for Arsenal was the third round of the FA Cup back in the day. Was it 95? Is it still as important as it was in your day, the FA Cup? Do the teams still view it with the importance that they used to and the excitement they used to?
No, I don't think it's quite the same, Jackie. We've said this for a number of years, haven't we? And I think especially for those clubs that are involved in the Champions League, that is almost the be-all and end-all of qualifying again for it next year, doing well this year. But it's still listen, there's only for most people, a couple of competitions maybe that they can win. Obviously, for the big clubs, they're looking at going for the title of Champions League, but for the majority of teams, there's the FA Cup, there's the Carabao Cup. And as you go along, get closer to Wembley, it becomes even more important. But it's still a magical competition. There's no question about it. I love the third round as well, with all the romance involved. Obviously, Arsenal, Liverpool, it's a bit different, but it should be an absolutely cracking game. And I would expect, Klopp and Arteta might just rotate the teams a little bit, but not too much, because for both sides to win this game would be a big boost.
Yeah, and just briefly, how important is the match tomorrow for Arsenal to win, to get a bit of momentum going again, having had a bit of a disappointing Christmas period?
Yeah, no, it would be. It would be a big boost and set them up for the Premier League campaign the following week. They have had a bit of a blip. So disappointing at Fulham. I covered that game for Sky, and they hardly troubled the Fulham goalkeeper. So they need to get back at it, and no better time to do it than in front of their own fans against, Liverpool, bang on form. Got lots of players that can hurt you going forward. So defensively, Arsenal will have to be at it. And they have been much better this season defensively. You only have to look at the goals conceded. So they're going to have to continue in that vein, and hopefully somebody can pop up and score a goal or two.
Now, that's tomorrow. Today, absolutely loads of ties. Perhaps the pick of those is Sunderland against Newcastle, this local rivalry. What was Sunderland thinking when they decked out one of their bars, their away bar admittedly, in Newcastle colours? The fans were furious. Who thought that was a good idea?
I don't know. I really don't. I don't think I've ever heard of this happening before. It just seems incredible. I mean, you expect them to be hospitable, welcoming, a glass of wine and a prawn sandwich maybe, but to virtually change the whole room into a Newcastle place, it does seem incredible, and no wonder the fans are up in arms. It's been a hard enough time anyway, hasn't it, when they see their neighbours up the road being heavily invested, going places, lots of money to spend, and Sunderland in the Championship, and then this happens to rub salt in the wound. So the Sunderland fans will be desperate to get one over Newcastle. It won't be easy at all. But yeah, whoever came up with that idea needs a bit of a rap on the knuckles, I think.
Yeah, I think they've admitted it. It was a really bad one. Yeah, big game for Sunderland, massive for Newcastle as well. They would love to win it and sort of turn things around for them. Alan Smith, thanks very much indeed. Thanks for your views on the FA Cup and your Arsenal views for tomorrow. Speak to you soon.
Thank you. Cheers, Jackie.
Now then, you're watching Sky News Breakfast. Don't go away. We've got lots coming up. We'll tell you about the children's choir that's played at the O2 more times than Adele, Ed Sheeran and Take That combined.
It's the global elite, isn't it? It's those in positions of power across governments, oil companies, media barons, banks, those who have persisted with the destruction of nature and with continuing with fossil fuel expansion year after year, when we have known unequivocally that it was going to drive what's happening now. Disaster. We're seeing it daily on our news screens, if you look. The catastrophe is fatal, and those people in power are not being held to account.
Well, I'm a bit mystified about the idea of global elites 125,000 years ago. I think the willingness to find blame or assign blame to people who've long been in their graves is a little bit odd. I wonder how the measurements are made of temperature 125,000 years ago. How can one be sure that what is touted as the hottest period since God knows when really is that? It's very difficult to believe that the statistics adduced about global temperatures so long ago are really credible.
The point is, if I drop this glass, which I'm not going to do because I'm non-violent and I don't like breaking things, if I drop this, it will break. That's gravity, isn't it? Like, denying that putting more carbon in the atmosphere causes global heating is absolutely insane. We know that. We've known it for 150 years. It's unequivocal. We know that the people in power know full well that what they are doing will drive mass death, and yet they are still doing it.
The fact is that you're measuring apples with pears when you're comparing the sedimentary record of 125,000 years ago, which is sampled every few centuries by scientists, to what's taken every a few weeks about global temperatures today. It's an entirely different procedure. I believe that industrialization in this last century has raised the temperature of the Earth. It'd be very strange if it hadn't. That's one thing. To suggest that anybody who differs from that is basically bordering on genocidal is the way we debate matters now. It's not scientific, it's to do with emotions. And that really won't suffice if we want a way forward to deal with global warming.
Now, thousands of children are getting ready to kick off the new year by sharing their love of music with audiences far and wide in a special UK tour. Young Voices is the world's largest school choir, and it's safe to say that they've performed at some pretty big venues over the years. So take a look at this. Well, I'm joined now by the Chief Executive of Young Voices, Ben Lewis, and this year's special celebrity guest, MC Grammer. Morning to both of you.
Morning.
That's so uplifting, just that little tiny bit of hearing the children singing in that venue. Ben, tell us about Young Voices and how you've managed to pull together so many children across the country.
Well, we started in 1996 in Dublin with one concert, and it was to try and bring live music to children primary school age. And fundamentally, it's about giving these schools the opportunity to learn all this music, loads of different styles of music, and then come together on the day in these huge arenas that are usually reserved for the icons of pop music and perform as one choir, up to 9,000 children at a time in the O2. We're doing 8 nights at the O2, 2 in Wembley. We've got 30 nights in total around the country, which is over 200,000 children. And they get to perform with artists like MC Grammer here.
Yeah, so and MC Grammer, I mean, your name basically describes what you do, doesn't it? Because it's about education through rap.
Yeah, I used to be a primary school teacher and used rap in the classroom to get the kids excited about learning, and now I'm doing it as an educational rapper. Called MC Grammer, but I'm also rapping about times tables, reading, geography, history, whatever it is to make learning fun and exciting for the kids.
Oh, and they must find these events so exciting. I mean, what's the main purpose, apart from giving them a good time? Is there a kind of a deeper element? Is there something about music that you think is important for these kids?
Well, I think music is the vehicle, but you think about being part of a choir, you think about all the work that goes into the big performance at the end. It's all about self-belief. It's all about teamwork and resilience and those qualities that you'll need for the rest of your life. We're not here to try and create the next pop star. Every child should deserve to have music in their life, and it will be great for them for the rest of their lives.
And what's your experience of working with these kids? Do you see a real difference in them before and after? What does it mean to them?
Oh, for sure. I mean, the confidence of performing at the O2, standing up and performing in front of that big crowd, the self-belief, the growth, the community, the choir, and the music uniting us. I mean, what a kickstart to a wonderful educational career, but also in life. It might be the musical seed that just gives them that self-belief.
Something that inspires them. And there's something about singing in a choir, there's been lots of studies about it, isn't there, that it really does lift your mood as well.
Exactly, and whether you're, at Glastonbury doing a sing-along with Lionel Richie with 100,000 people...
I do that all the time.
All the time. Or you're at a rugby match and you're singing the anthem, that connectivity, you look around, you're smiling at everyone around you. It's those moments that, they lift you and they create that community. And I think when those children walk out of any of the arenas we do, they feel that connection and they grow as a person as well.
And different kids at the different venues and so many of them. So what are you looking forward to with this tour?
I'm so excited to share with the kids the moments. I mean, for an artist to write a song on your own on a piece of paper and then walk out into an arena, 20,000 people singing those lyrics and words, you know, that impact, just to know you've had that inspiration and that change and the opportunity Ben has given me here and Young Voices, I'm very grateful for.
Oh, it sounds like a really positive thing. And I mean, just looking at the scenes of them filling those stages is unbelievable. Ben Lewis, good luck with it. MC Grammar, Jacob, also known as. Good luck with it
thank
all.
You so
and
much.
thank you so much for coming in and telling
Thanks,
us about
Anna.
it. And wish the kids well. They're going to have a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's check on the weather now.